Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. Putin and Trump. They're playing nuclear chicken. Who will blink first? Got a World War III update. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, it's not looking too good for Ukraine. Revolutionary salute. Korean revolutionary salute. Big bro. Trump's running out of things to do. He's already played his nuclear hands. So either he's going to fire off those nukes or Ukraine will continue to burn. Let's get into the content. Salute, family. Good for them over there. Why did Trump get this man Putin upset?
Footage circulating online on August 3rd showed extensive fires on targets in Nikolaev, a consequence of Kinzhal cruise missile fired during a strike at 10 p.m. by the Russian Aerospace and Missile Forces, at night operation on August 2, 2025. According to preliminary information, the missile struck a location of mercenaries for the armed forces of Ukraine, in a residential area on the outskirts of Nikolaev, war correspondent Yuri Kotnok reported. Ukrainian monitoring channels further reported that Russian Tu-22M3 bomber fired Kinzhal missiles at targets in Nikolaev. Following the missile strike, extensive fires broke out in the city, with certain locations completely destroyed. The explosion caused a power outage in Nikolaev, including in Kherson region. At the same time, the takeoff of Tu-22M3 strategic bomber from Engels Air Base was reported. Meanwhile, reports from Turkish sources stated that the attack targeted temporary accommodation for NATO soldiers from Europe. The facility housed French mercenaries and instructors, and the attack is suspected to have caused foreign casualties. Local residents reported several ambulances arriving at the scene. However, this is pending further information and official confirmation from the authorities. In total, since March 2022, approximately 50,000 foreign mercenaries serving in the armed forces of Ukraine have been killed in combat. Many are Americans, British, Germans, French, and most notably thousands of Poles. This means the war in Ukraine is a global war.
NATO troops. It's probably way more. There's some piece of those NATO troops that's being whacked in Ukraine every day. That's what Trump really mad about. And those British mercenaries, those NATO mercenaries that's under arrest, they're probably finna be on trial. Working hard labor in the Siberian prison camps, you know. They tough on crime over there in Russia. They don't like terrorists or Nazis.
The expert community across Asian countries continues to discuss the conflict between Donald Trump and Dmitry Medvedev, as a result of which the US president ordered 2 American nuclear submarines to be sent to Russia's shores. In particular, experts from the Indonesian newspaper the Jakarta Post noted that Russia absolutely does not care about Trump's ultimatum and his loud nuclear saber rattling. According to them, after Donald Trump in an ultimatum form demanded to cease hostilities in Ukraine from Moscow, Russian troops demonstratively intensified offensive operations in all directions of the front, forcing the Ukrainian army even to surrender such a strategically important city as Siberia. All this indicates that the Russian authorities absolutely do not care about threats and ultimatums from the United States. Moreover, experts from the Jakarta Post also noted that while the United States is threatening Moscow with new unprecedented sanctions, the Russian and Chinese naval forces have launched major joint naval exercises in the Sea of Japan. Specifically, we are referring to naval drills under the designation Maritime Interaction 2025. According to experts from the Jakarta Post, the unification of the Russian and Chinese fleets in the Asia-Pacific region indicates that Moscow and Beijing intend to finally squeeze Western forces out of this part of the planet. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump, speaking to American journalists, said that if Russia does not comply with his ultimatum by August 8, and does not stop the fighting in Ukraine, Washington would impose new sanctions against Moscow. At the same time, Donald Trump recognized that these new sanctions might also be ineffective, just like the previous ones. According to him, Russians are very cunning people, and thanks to this, Moscow can successfully circumvent all Western sanctions. Yes, if they do not stop the war in Ukraine, I will impose new sanctions on Russia. However, it is worth recognizing that they know how to avoid sanctions. You know, they are quite cunning people, and they successfully avoid these sanctions. So, we will see what happens, Donald Trump said. My dear truth seekers, it is also worth noting that there are people among the expert community who are sure that Donald Trump, with his ultimatum and sanctions against Moscow, is playing some role to convince Western globalists that he is allegedly opposed to Russia. According to them, Donald Trump does not care about Ukraine, and that at the moment, the presidents of Russia and the United States are solving more global problems and the upcoming division of the world into spheres of influence. According to them, the fact that Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff will arrive in Moscow on August 7 or 8 indicates that Donald Trump really is not intending to spoil relations with Russia. Well, my friends, whether these statements are true or not, we'll find out in the months to come. Meanwhile, the situation of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces continues to deteriorate rapidly in all key directions of the front. In particular, a few hours ago, war correspondents reported on another Russian army success in Pokrovsk direction of the front. According to them, on the morning of August 4, Russian troops broke through the Ukrainian army's defenses and entered the settlement of Krasny Liman, northeast of Pokrovsk. Simultaneously with this, war correspondents also confirmed information about the capture of such coal mines as Krasnolemanskoye and Rodinskoye by Russian troops. Furthermore, on August 4, at 10 a.m. Moscow time, the Russian army also managed to liberate the settlement of Suketskoye. As a result, the Ukrainian grouping in Pokrovsk lost another supply route. The fact is that the liberation of Suketskoye allowed the Russian army to completely cut the Dobropoli-Pokrovsk highway, along which the Ukrainian command supplied the Ukrainian grouping in Pokrovsk with everything necessary. In this regard, even pro-government Ukrainian TG channels have begun to recognize that Pokrovsk and Mirnograd are doomed, and that the complete transition of these strategically important cities under the Russian army's control may take place in early autumn of this year. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry showed unique footage of the destruction of the classified command post of the 128th Separate Mountain Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Army, in the settlement of Novosilovka, in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The footage clearly shows how the aerial bomb Fab 3000, accurately hits an enemy object, destroying all life within a radius of several hundred meters. Later, representatives of the Russian military department said that at the time of the bomb strike, a meeting of high-ranking officers of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine with military instructors from France and Canada was taking place at this command post. It is authentically known that as a result of this bomb strike, 50 enemy officers were killed. However, this figure may rise rapidly in the coming hours. The fact is that the sources also confirmed that about 20 enemy officers were seriously injured as a result of this bomb strike. Furthermore, on the same day, 2 Russian Iskander-M ballistic missiles rained down on the territory of the Ocean Shipyard, in the southern part of the city of Nikolaev. As it turned out, an hour before this missile strike, Russian intelligence confirmed that a place of temporary deployment of French mercenaries was located on the territory of this shipyard. Later, the Russian Defense Ministry declared that as a result of this missile attack, 30 French citizens were killed. It is worth noting that Turkish sources also announced a missile attack on Nikolaev, which killed dozens of French citizens. However, Turkish sources refused to identify them as mercenaries. According to them, all the French citizens who died in Nikolaev were active duty soldiers and officers of the French army.
right-wing media finnerty about the situation.
Former president of Russia, who's now in charge of one of the most important councils, Medvedev, said some things that were very bad, talking about nuclear. And when you mention the word nuclear, I say, you know, my eyes light up and I say, we better be careful because it's the ultimate threat. Shouldn't have said it. He's got a fresh mouth. He said things in the past too. And so we always want to be ready. And so I have sent to the region 2 nuclear submarines. I just want to make sure that his words are only words and nothing more than that.
Yes. Well, also in this escalation, we have to get to some of the context. This is what Donald Trump was referencing, this spat with Dmitry Medvedev. This is what Medvedev wrote on Telegram. He said, about India's, we'll just go to the 3rd paragraph, it's the most important, India's and Russia's dead economies entering very dangerous territory. Well, let Trump remember his favorite movies about Walking Dead, as well as how dangerous the fabled dead hand can be, referencing a nuclear escalation doctrine on the part of Russia. So before I get to the whole Oreshnik situation, Brian, your initial reactions to what's going on when it comes to Ukraine vis-a-vis Trump, as Donald Trump himself imposes ultimatums on Russia, or attempts to, and threatens nuclear war.
Well, this was all about continuity of agenda. This was, you know, what I had said before he even was elected president. I said that all of this is going to continue. There is a single agenda, and the only thing that changes are the lies that are used to sell the agenda to the public and the excuses made for why things are not changing despite campaign promises otherwise. And so what we see President Trump doing right now is making excuses and just outright lying about why this war continues. This war, he said he was going to stop in 24 hours. And people said, well, that's not even realistic. He couldn't do that if he wanted to. But in reality, this is a war between the United States and Russia being fought in and through Ukraine. Again, the New York Times reported this. This isn't me saying this or Russia saying this. The New York Times admitted from 2014 onward, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency took control over all of Ukraine's intelligence agencies. And from 2022 onward, U.S. generals have been at the top of the chain of command of Ukraine's armed forces. So this is literally being fought and overseen and organized and planned by the United States. And all the U.S. president has to do is say, I'm bringing the generals home, the CIA is out, and then the war is over. And he literally could make this decision in one day, and then it would be over. And what he's trying to do right now is just freeze the conflict. And I warned people, if you listen carefully, even during the campaign, this was what he was saying. This is what J.D. Vance was saying. This is what everyone else he had around him during campaign season. This is what they were saying. They were saying, we shouldn't be sending weapons to Ukraine because we need them to go fight China. So it's not ending war, it's just creating a bigger war. But then there was always the caveat that we are going to dump this conflict on Europe. So we're not ending it. We're at best going to try to freeze it because we're losing it right now, as you alluded to earlier, Danny. And we are going to continue this, but through Europe. And as I constantly repeat, this is about division of labor, which is a term U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth used back in February, division of labor. And this is also about strategic sequencing. The U.S. cannot fight Russia, China, and Iran all at the same time. So they need to do it in turn. And so this is what we're watching. And what we're watching is Biden policy being sold under the MAGA/America First marketing slogans. That's all this is.
Yeah, KJ, your assessment.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Brian. There's a very clear continuity of agenda. People think that it's chaos or consolidation, but no, it's clearly a continuity. And so this is what makes things, extraordinarily dangerous. The thing about the submarines, I think it's important to point out, this is rhetorical posturing, but even rhetorical posturing is dangerous because it signals that you're moving up the escalation ladder. The signals themselves are part of the escalation ladder. Just so that we understand, the Ohio-class submarine, let's assume that it's SSBN, ballistic missile launching Ohio-class submarine. Each one of them carries 24 Trident II missiles. These Trident II missiles have a range between 7,600 kilometers to 12,000 kilometers. So just the fact that Trump is saying that I'm placing them closer actually doesn't mean very much, because they're designed to launch intercontinental missiles. But again, the firepower that they have is each Trident, if you consider that it has 24, that it will be carrying 24 Trident missiles, each one which has 8 475 kiloton warheads, then you're looking something in the range of about 91,000 kilotons that a single submarine can launch. That is to say, the equivalent of 6,000 Hiroshimas. If you have two of them that are being signaled right now, that's 12,000 Hiroshimas right there. So in other words, this is an extraordinarily foolish threat to be making. And it's not simply, trolling or, posturing, because these kinds of messaging push you further up the escalation ladder. And it's, and with Trump's mindset, where he has said himself that about nuclear weapons, what do you mean we can't use them? Meaning that he thinks that, it's permissible to use these things. So it's just an extraordinarily dangerous situation. And it ties into the fact that the US is continuing to escalate to war, to world war. And I believe that it is fully capable of using nuclear weapons.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and Brian, I wanted to actually, before we get to Russia's response in a second, I just wanted to show you this because major mainstream media, Western media, are very happy about Donald Trump's posture right now toward Russia, including here on Newsweek. Trump fixed NATO. He can fix it's about prescription drug prices. But what I found so interesting is that this person was a deputy U.S. trade representative for the first Trump administration. And essentially, what he says is he says he successfully fixed NATO by getting NATO and all European countries in NATO to fall into line. And so I'm curious, Brian, where does this all fit in? Because that's his argument. That is the argument of Jeffrey Jarish, the author of that article. He says that European countries in NATO are falling into line, and Trump did that. He fixed NATO, and now NATO is talking about 2027 war with Russia, and Trump is using Twitter spats, spats, social media spats to escalate with Russia. It all points the same direction. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, President Trump's comments and announcement that he's moving these submarines, as KJ pointed out, it's just absurd. It's posturing. It's probably never even happened. These submarines are, again, as KJ pointed out, they're always within reach of U.S. designated adversaries. But the point is, he's responding to something someone said on X about the dead hand. The dead hand is a system or a method of retaliating against a nuclear strike on Russia. This is what Russia was talking about. If we are attacked, even if you wipe out all of our leadership, we still have this mechanism in place to retaliate with nuclear weapons. So this is what President Trump is reacting to. Something somebody said in defense against constant U.S. warmongering toward Russia. Now, I can prove that President Trump always meant to lie to the American people from the very beginning about ending the conflict in Ukraine, because at the same time he constantly said he was going to end the conflict in 24 hours. He was also saying, I'm going to get NATO to ramp up spending. Every member in NATO is going to spend up to 5% of their GDP on military matters for NATO. Why does NATO exist? NATO exists solely to confront, encroach upon, encircle, contain, and eventually absorb Russia. That is its only purpose for existence. And if Trump is talking about expanding NATO while at the same time claiming he's going to end this war against Russia, he's telling you up front that, no, we're not actually going to end the conflict in Ukraine. I'm telling you what you want to hear. The agenda is to continue this belligerence toward Russia, this encroachment upon Russia, the encirclement and containment of Russia, and this constant threat to Russia that obviously Russia is going to respond to. So even during campaign season, he was telling you this was never going to end. It was only going to escalate. If you're telling NATO members you need to spend more on NATO, it's because you need NATO to do more what? To do more confrontation toward Russia. So again, people have to listen carefully to what is actually being said instead of just hearing what they want to hear. So it's blatant. It's blatant. I think a lot of people have woken up. I think more people still need to wake up. And unfortunately, people who have invested in President Trump, especially Americans who have invested in President Trump, he can do no wrong in their mind. And in their mind, they just constantly tell themselves, well, maybe that's not really what I voted for, but at least it's not Kamala Harris. At least it's not Biden. When in reality, it is. It's just continuity of agenda with President Trump selling it instead of somebody else.
KJ, a lot of this seems to point to the Trump administration's deep commitment to trying to dictate terms, not only to Russia, but the entire multipolar world. And while some in the United States may have had expectations about what Donald Trump would do with regard to Ukraine and so-called peace, which is completely being burst asunder by both his words and deeds, Vladimir Putin, I'll just play this on mute because it's in Russian with captions. I'll read it for all of you. Let me just speed it up a bit. This is what he said when he was with Viktor Lukashenko of Belarus about negotiations with the U.S. As for any disappointments on anyone's part, all disappointments arise from excessive expectations. This is a well-known general rule. In order to approach the issue in a peaceful manner, it is necessary to have detailed conversations, not in public, but this must be done calmly, in silence in the negotiation process. So Putin spells it out quite firmly there that he didn't, given the way things have gone, he didn't really have huge expectations. And now the situation has changed completely. But KJ, your comments.
Yeah, so I think Putin is showing himself as the measured and skilled statesman he is. He's pointing out both, philosophically and pragmatically, expectations need to be managed. And I think this is a message both to his domestic audience, the international audience, as well as the White House. I think that it's pretty clear that, whatever hope that people were deluding themselves around de-escalation is no longer, possible. I think that, as Brian has pointed out, we are looking at continuity of agenda. We're looking at division of labor. We're looking at strategic sequencing. That said, once again, we have to understand the US political system for what it is. Each time we have a new president, they each come in saying and promising the moon, and most notably, always promising to end wars. I mean, this was true for Nixon, it's true for Obama. This is why Obama was elected. I mean, within days, he received the Nobel Prize for, for peace, Nobel Peace Prize, right? Of course, it was completely unwarranted. Same thing for Trump. He was elected on an anti-war platform because the desire for people, which is completely, rational, is for peace. People want peace. They want stable lives so they can go ahead and try to build decent lives for themselves and their families. And when you have war, that destroys everything. And of course, we have the warmonger class, which, as far as I can tell, seems dead set on war, on global war. And we're looking at the four horsemen of capitalism. We're looking at deindustrialization. We're looking at financialization. We're looking at de-skilling. And we're looking at internal contradictions that can only be dealt with by escalating to kinetic war. This is the reset button for a failing system. It's the wall defibrillator that you use when the capitalist beast, has gone into cardiac arrest. You start the war machine. And this is what I'm very, very afraid of. And this is what everything seems to be pointing towards.
Yeah. And Brian, your comments on Russia's, how Russia has responded here, because throughout the duration of this, we haven't seen Russia budge on their demands. We haven't seen them even give an inch. There isn't even any whiff of normalization. Forget the conflict itself. Your thoughts about how Russia has responded to all of this, because still Steve Witkoff is going to have come and gone from Russia very soon. And no one is expecting any kind of quote unquote breakthrough, because the song and dance is the same. It's the US going in and saying, do what we say. This is what we want from you. Exactly what you said earlier, Brian. We want a ceasefire. We want to freeze. Your thoughts?
Exactly. For Russia, it's existential. This is a war being waged against Russia by the United States. It's not even just being waged against Russia through Ukraine, but through all of Europe and through all of these so-called allies. I think more accurately to call them proxies of the United States, client states of the United States. And this is what they're responding to. So if they were to agree to a ceasefire, essentially freezing the conflict, all they're doing is giving the collective West time and space to rearm, to reorganize Ukraine's military, to reorganize Europe's military, because they're getting online to go in next. We see them making the preparations. And it would knock the wind out of Russia's momentum that they have and the advantage that they have in terms of military industrial production. This is something that I think people are somewhat complacent. They think that there's no possible way for the U.S. to catch up, and in a lot of ways, it's difficult for them to catch up. But every single year, they're working on it a little bit more each year. And you don't have forever to fight this war. So Russia needs to end this. They need to end it on their terms. If it is frozen, it will end up like Syria, a conflict everybody thought was concluded or at least stalemated, but in favor of Syria and its allies, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah. But we saw how the United States reorganized the terrorist proxies it was using, how it used nations like Turkey and Israel, and Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all of these nations to recalibrate their support for these terrorists. And when the opportunity availed itself, they took it, they completely overthrew and collapsed Syria as a functioning nation state. And so this is what Russia is looking at if they were to capitulate to these demands. And what the United States is doing right now, they're not looking for peace. They want to freeze it. They want to coerce Russia into accepting a freeze so that they can create the conditions later on where they could succeed where they are currently failing. If you look at the map on the ground in Ukraine, Russian forces just took Chasiv Yar. They are on the doorstep of Seversk, and they have entered into Kupiansk. They've surrounded Petrovsk, which is all of these are extremely heavily fortified areas along the line of contact. Yep, that is Petrovsk right there. There's reports that Russian forces are operating across the city. We've been hearing this for weeks, and the Ukrainians are saying, well, it's normal. You just get a couple of these sabotage teams, but it's every single day. So it's more than just that. And the logistics have been complicated. And once that happens, everything starts to accelerate. And this is what Russia has done to all of these major cities. And Ukraine has not been able to stop Russia even one time. Once this process begins, inevitably the city will fall and everything will move even further west. And if you look at the map, you see that Ukraine is running out of cities to hide in until they reach the Dnieper River. So this is significant. This is why we see panic across the West, and especially in Washington, who ultimately engineered this proxy war and is worried about losing it.
Yeah, and KJ, perhaps you can build on that, because as Brian was talking, there are these significant battlefield achievements by Russia of late. Chasiv Yar, as he mentioned, Pokrovsk is just an absolute mess for Ukraine and the U.S. Then there's also the political situation for Ukraine is very unstable. Talks of a kind of internal regime change scenario likely coming in the very near future. There just seems to be mounting problems, and just the way that Donald Trump is behaving is showing that when there is an unfavorable situation in front of the war machine, it regresses to the mean. KJ, your final thoughts on this?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is, it's so repeated so often that it's starting to become trite. But Kissinger said that it is dangerous to be an enemy of the United States, and it is lethal, it is deadly to be an ally. And this is exactly the same thing that we see happening for Zelensky. I mean, Zelensky was a corrupt clown of, a potentate. You put a clown in power, you are going to get a circus. But what he was supposed to do was he was supposed to take direction cleanly, and the U.S. never imagined that Ukraine would not win. Russia is a gas station, right? They were just going to roll over it. It was just an appetizer on the way to the main course, which was China. And so now that he is losing, they want to get rid of him, just as they got rid of Diem, that they got rid of Syngman Rhee, they got rid of Park Chung-hee. All of these dictators that the US puts into power, when they become losers, and Trump hates nothing. There's nothing that Trump hates more than a loser. Once they become losers, they become expendable, and they need to change them out. We know that, there are people waiting in the wings And all of this signals that the US, the West, knows that they're losing on the battlefields. They're trying to see if they can get some kind of a rebrand on the political sphere and see if they can stoke up their vassals and get them to re-engage in war. But ultimately, it is a lost war. This is a war of attrition, depends on industrial capacity. And as we've said many, many times before, if you deindustrialize, you not only are deindustrializing, but you're also de-skilling. If you've done that, then it's very, very hard to recover that. The problem is that the United States is led by a generation of military leaders that have not engaged in protracted industrial war for at least 2 generations. And so they are completely unmoored. They don't understand what they're doing. They're still relying on Israeli war doctrine, which came out of the Yom Kippur War, which then was the basis of the US's air-land battle, which is also the basis for the anti-war doctrine air-sea battle. And this is based on rapid decapitation strikes. It is not about protraction or industrial warfare. And they simply are not capable of understanding that the situation has changed. And once again, if that happens, then what is the ace in the hole that they will reach for? Do they actually have the capacity to freeze it? Are they going to resort to nuclear threats? Well, they already are.
So, well, let's get to this. Let's get to another aspect, because usually Russia responds to threats, it responds to escalations in a variety of ways. So let's talk about this. So first, Vladimir Putin was visiting Viktor Lukashenko of Belarus to talk about, in particular, our Oreshnik missiles, which are going to be deployed and stationed in Belarus. And this is what he had to say. Hold on, no, this is not the right one. This is what he had to say regarding this that has the collective West in somewhat of a major state of alarm. Here's what he said.
The first thing I wanted to say in this connection, we have already manufactured the first serial production Oreshnik missile complex, and it's already been fielded.
So the Oreshnik missile is now mass produced. It is fielded, and that, of course, given the test that occurred last year and how much that frightened the West and the power of that missile, that has caused some great panic. But then a Russian lawmaker had this to say in particular about the nuclear submarine threat. Viktor Vodolatsky responded to Donald Trump's nuclear submarine threat, the movement of nuclear submarines to appropriate regions, by saying there are significantly more of our nuclear submarines in the world's oceans, and they have the strongest and most powerful weapons. This is why Trump's 2 boats, let them float. They have been at gunpoint for quite a long time. So very strong words. I mean, this moment is very reminiscent of the Cold War. It's a very kind of new Cold War-like moment where we have Russia gearing up in a very big way, Brian, for this larger conflict. And Oreshniks are now a part of this. Many people have said, well, this isn't a direct threat. It doesn't really mean much. It doesn't mean Oreshniks are going to be used, but they're available. And that's a big deal for a country like Russia, which is under significant threat right now. What's your thoughts?
Well, this is Russia. Russia has to demonstrate significant deterrence against the United States and its client states, because if they don't, we can see the U.S. will just continue taking and taking and taking. They do this salami slice strategy where they just take just a tiny bit each time, so that it doesn't seem like a big deal, but over time it starts to add up. They've been doing the exact same thing to Iran in the Middle East, and they've done the exact same thing to China in the Asia Pacific. And as a matter of fact, we've already seen the conflict with Iran culminate in open war. And this is exactly how these other conflicts are going to unfold. And the United States honestly believes that eventually it could fight a war against these countries directly. It suspects that it can do this without it escalating to nuclear warfare, or they believe somehow it would be limited nuclear war. And they feel, and maybe there is some truth to this, they're on the other side of the planet. They have oceans between them and everybody else. And so when they are causing all of this murder, mayhem, death, and destruction from one side of Eurasia to the other, they're destroying everything there. And the United States remains untouched on the other side of the planet. The US has its forces spanning the globe, and they're able to project this military power in ways that both Russia and China cannot. Of course, Iran most certainly cannot. And so this does give them an advantage. They see that over time, the trajectory of the rise of multipolarism, the fading of US-led unipolarism, they know that this opportunity isn't going to last forever, so they're trying to take advantage of it now while it lasts. Now, you were talking about the Oreshnik and how these weapons and other weapons have been stationed in Belarus. And what Russia is basically doing is extending protection and essentially almost integrating Belarus into the Russian Federation. Because if they don't do this, the US is going to use its other super weapon that a lot of people don't really seem to talk about or notice that much. And that is America's ability to infiltrate and politically capture a targeted nation. This is what they did to Ukraine, which caused this war in the first place, which short-circuited the Ukrainian people's ability to pursue their own best interests and to essentially commit national suicide. And they openly tried to do this to Belarus many times over the past 2 or 3 decades. Since the end of the Cold War, essentially. They are doing this here in the Asia-Pacific region. They've already politically captured Europe. The European Union is essentially an American project, an extension of American policy. People always ask, why is Europe doing this? They're destroying their own economy. Why are they doing this? Because the people in power do not represent or reflect the interest of Europe. They reflect the interest of Washington, who put them there in power. They're doing they want to create the same dynamics here in the Asia-Pacific region. And they've done this in the Middle East to a great degree. They have all kinds of proxies there who are pursuing war and proxy war against their own best interest to serve American hegemony worldwide. So this is the threat that Russia, China, and Iran are faced with, and I would say multipolarism as a whole. And the response to this has to be full spectrum, because the US is waging full spectrum war against them.
Yeah, well, KJ, perhaps assess that in the case of Russia then, because, not only did this Russian lawmaker say straight up that we have our weapons pointed at you, we have our submarines pointed at you, they're more effective. They've been there for quite a long time. But when it comes to the Oreshnik, I mean, this is quite a powerful weapon. And while, yes, the United States, to Brian's point, it has the will. It wants to expand. It wants to move. There's a Russia and China, these countries, they don't want to fight wars of aggression. So what do you make of the overall situation and Russia's response in this context?
Well, once again, I think it's important to highlight that Russia has been very, very measured throughout the war. But the US is pushing the buttons, and they're trying to go as far as they can. So, absolutely, Russians don't want to fight, just like the Chinese don't want to fight. They don't want a war, but they're also signaling that if we need to go up the threshold, if we need to go up the escalation ladder, we will. And the Oreshnik is a very interesting weapon, because it is a non-nuclear strategic weapon. That is, it's a weapon that has the force and the destructive capacity of a nuclear weapon, but it is non-nuclear. It works purely from the kinetic energy that it generates in its incredibly rapid hypersonic flight. The US has nothing that can deal with that can challenge that. And even if we were to remove Oreshniks from the picture, we've also seen that the US missile shield, the US capacity to defend itself, has been tested. It's been thoroughly tested in the recent Israel-Iran war, the 12-day war, and it has been found completely lacking. let's think about what happened between, in the exchange between Iran and Israel. Well, True Promise 3 was the largest ballistic missile launch in history, 500, 550 missiles. We don't know exactly how many hit, but we know that the battle damage was enough that Israel had to tap out, and that it also was hiding the battle damage. This is currently censored. So whatever happened, we know that it was significant. In this process, we also know that the US threw everything they had against Iran's missile capacity. That is, they brought in Patriots from other theaters. In fact, they said it was the most intense Patriot engagement in the history of the weapon. They brought in the THAAD system. The Israelis themselves had David's Sling Arrow 2 and 3, and the Iron Dome. So multiple layers of defense systems, and the Russians were able to demolish these with what looked to be largely conventional ballistic missiles. So that sends a very, very strong message to the United States. You no longer have escalation dominance. You no longer have a missile shield. You no longer have impunity in attacking countries with standoff weapons, as that they have always had. And if you think of that equation, and then on top of that, you add hypersonics like the Oreshnik, which, as I said, are strategic non-nuclear weapons, then I think that the United States, if it were to think carefully, would say, we need to sue for peace right away. But it's not doing that. It only knows one thing, which is to escalate and to move forward. It doesn't have a reverse gear. It doesn't even have, the neutral, the idle gear is only so that it can go forward again. And so this is a very, very dangerous moment. And we have to understand that, as Brian said, the US will do several other things. It's waging full spectrum war. So as conventional war becomes less and less viable, they will do, the kind of dirty wars, the small wars, the regime change, color revolution operations, creating essentially chaos around the world, and certainly all around Asia. And then the other thing that, we know is being prepared are tactical nukes, which Elbridge Colby has been talking about for at least a decade. And then we also know that the information warfare will continue to accelerate. The key strength that the United States has above and beyond any other skill and capacity is its capacity to mystify, indoctrinate, and to wage information war. So once again, we should expect an even greater level of propaganda and indoctrination.
Yeah. Brian, you, as KJ was talking, I was thinking about your prior point about how the United States can't really catch up to Russia. It's trying, but what's such an interesting contradiction for the United States at this time when it comes to developments like the Oreshnik is that it has to, its doctrine has been win wars, quote unquote, quickly, right? Full spectrum dominance and aggression, take out the enemy, quote unquote, as fast as possible, regime change as fast as possible. That is victory. Now with Russia, though, there's a commitment to a long war because that was never really in the cards, and it's a dangerous contradiction when you both have this need to keep the conflict going on the part of the United States, as well as the fact that Russia is going to continue onward developing its own industrial base, leading to possibly this parallel process between the two of endless conflict. And that seems to be the only choice the US has, and is very committed to doing this.
I'd be very careful about underestimating the United States. No, they do not have the industrial power to wage a protracted war of attrition with Russia or China, or even with Iran, we saw the trouble they had in that conflict, as KJ was just pointing out. The problem is the United States fully understands this. They understand that this is a weakness. It's inherent in the system that represents U.S. special interests, this pursuit of power and profit over purpose, the inability to create the state-owned enterprises that would actually facilitate the military power required to seize power, keep power by force, only by force. But see, the United States has cultivated all of these other options. They have tremendous economic power. They're still wielding. I just watched the United States coerce multiple nations in ASEAN, here in Southeast Asia, into these, I wouldn't even call them trade deals. It was trade concessions and trade coercion. And they're able to do this because of their economic power and all the other non-military instruments of power that the U.S. has perfected over the last several decades. And I keep going back to this ability of the U.S. to infiltrate a country politically, in terms of seizing its information space, education, rigging the political system if it's a nation that has a Western style, quote unquote democracy. This is a system the U.S. and the British imposed on many of these countries outside of the West, specifically because it allows them to come in, interfere in that system, and create the results each and every single time an election takes place that favors them and their interests at the cost of the interest of the actual country holding these so-called elections. And the United States still has tremendous power over many nations, has outright politically captured all of Europe, Japan, South Korea. It has taken the island province of Taiwan, has politically captured that. This is part of China, but it has been politically captured by the United States. And the United States is working its way into nations where it has varying levels of success here in Southeast Asia. There was this border conflict between Thailand and Cambodia. The dynamics there were specifically because the U.S. has influence pretty much over the entire Cambodian government. It's a one-party, single-family government, and they have pivoted hard back toward the United States over the last year or so. And they also have politically captured the political system, information space, and education system here in Thailand. And there is currently a U.S.-backed client regime in power here. And so this is how they're able to get these countries to make concessions, to make agreements, to do things, to pursue policies that serve U.S. interests at their own expense, and create these dilemmas for nations like Russia, Iran, and China. These nations are surrounding. These nations are located along their peripheries. This is a super weapon the U.S. has and uses, and this is how it is responding to the reality that it cannot fight an all-out war against Russia and China directly, but it has other ways of pursuing this conflict. I just want to remind people that the whole conflict in Ukraine was never about defeating Russia. It was about extending Russia. There's literally a paper titled "Extending Russia" by the Rand Corporation, published in 2019, that says we want this conflict. We are going to throw Ukraine into this conflict. We know Ukraine will be destroyed, but it will raise the cost for Russia. It will overextend Russia. It will tie up Russia. And this is where strategic sequencing comes in place. If the U.S. just pivoted from Russia to Iran or to China, and it did not create this quagmire to suck Russia into Ukraine, Russia could just pivot and take all of its resources and support Iran or to support China. But because the U.S. has created these dilemmas for Russia and Ukraine, for Iran in across the entire Middle East, and for China in terms of Taiwan and Southeast Asia, the South China Sea, it has locked all of these countries in place, and this is what will allow them to attack and defeat in detail all three of these pillars of multipolarism.
Well, Putin alluded, Brian and KJ, I'll get your response after we play this. Putin alluded to this in his presser with Viktor Lukashenko of Belarus. This is what he said. I'll put it on mute again because it's in Russian. With caption: in the modern world, this has always been important, but today especially, sovereignty plays a particularly key role, one might say, including for economic development. It was clear that the European Union did not have that much sovereignty. Today, it has become obvious that it does not exist at all, and this is immediately followed in the critical situation and economic losses that follow. But KJ, Russia, China, I mean, these countries are championing sovereignty very, very hard, much to Brian's assessment. I think in response to Brian's assessment. So, but your reaction to all of this?
Well, I think, we've had this discussion before. As Brian says, the US's super weapon is information war. It dominates information space and mental space. And it does this because it has had centuries of practice in essentially propaganda. It's marketing, it's propaganda, it's also, religious doctrine. All of these things come together in a way that is very, very powerful, that allows them to control and have literally monopoly control over information space. And they also control the hardware as well that allows the access or the dissemination of information. So that is a very, very tough nut to crack. But specifically regarding, the notion of sovereignty, the United States regards any country that asserts its sovereignty as authoritarian. So, for example, China is authoritarian because it upholds its sovereignty. Now, technically, the world system is supposed to be made up of sovereign states. So this is actually, goes back to the Treaty of Westphalia. It's at least 4 centuries old. And certainly it was enshrined in the UN and certainly in the Bandung principles of sovereignty and non-interference. But all of that has been thrown out the window if it was ever, anything more than window dressing. Specifically in the early 2000s, the US, came forth with a doctrine where they said that sovereignty is contingent. What is it contingent on? Well, they said it's contingent on good governance and human rights. What they really mean is it's contingent on whether you are a good vassal, whether you allow yourselves to be subjugated to the hegemon. And so the US has constructed this entire, vocabulary with which it captures, the global system. As I said, operations mean war, defense means offense, security means hegemony. So anytime the US talks about ensuring security, what they really are talking about is ensuring US hegemony. Anytime they say deter, for example, deter China, what they're really talking about is provoking China. And certainly this notion of sovereignty has been so wiped clean of its original sense because the US has this hegemonic ambition to control all the countries of the world. Now that is slipping away. Clearly, Russia, China, Iran are sovereign states, and as are more and more countries of the global South. But still, the U.S. Ability, the power to compel and to coerce other countries is significant. And as Brian pointed out, we saw this in the ways that they all kind of peeled off and capitulated one by one to Trump's tariffs. I mean, just one example is South Korea, which has agreed to 15% tariffs and $450 billion worth of investment and purchases, of which $350 billion South Korea is committed to invest in the United States. Now, the tricky thing here is that that's about all of South Korea's foreign exchange reserves. In other words, they're going to empty their pockets in order to please or to appease the hegemon. That said, I don't want us to think that everything, is lost and that, it's just one-sided game. Once again, if you look at Korea recently got rid of the US quisling, Yoon Suk-yeol. He was literally, impeached, kicked out. And now they have, a very much more progressive leader who is trying his best, A, not to get couped, and B, to put up some kind of resistance against the empire. If you look at the discussions around geostrategic maneuvering in East Asia, Korea is more and more dropped. The ambitions for Korea seem to be more diminished, and the role of Japan is much more emphasized or accelerated. Most recently, U.S. discussions around using nuclear weapons with Japan. Taiwan, of course, is it is the spear point of U.S. ambitions in East Asia. But once again, very recently, they tried to initiate a legislative coup. They were going to recall all the opposition lawmakers who were opposed to their escalation to war. And they were actually thoroughly trounced at the ballot box, which shows that there is considerable resistance on the ground. Right now, the U.S. quisling DPP Taiwan Party is reeling, as is the United States itself, because things have not gone according to plan. And of course, Japan has been blowing hot and cold. Ishiba has been going along with the Shinzo Abe agenda, which is rapid remilitarization. But he has also been a little bit of a loose cannon. He said in the past that yes, we want to support the United States. We're happy to have U.S. bases on our territory, but as a sovereign state, in terms of reciprocity, we would also like to place Japanese military bases on U.S. sovereign territory. That did not go over well, and it looks like he's going to be, pushed out. But there are contradictions inside the system, and those are the things that we have to look for. We have to look at where the contradictions are, see where there are crevices, and then we have to, expand and allow those contradictions to be visible and present.
Yeah, and I think to both of your points, I think they go very well together. There's for the United States, as its empire really loses the capacity to arrest the development of something like multipolarity, the more desperate it becomes. And the more desperate it becomes, yes, there's a lot of weakness and decline there. But when an empire is backed into a corner, it lashes out as much and as hard as it can. And that's what it is doing now. And that's why, Brian, to your point, not only has the United States has totally its foreign policy has totally come to the conclusion that there is no real quote unquote defeat of Russia beyond continuing this conflict as long as possible, and is hoping and seeing if that opens up opportunities in the future that maybe we can't foresee that allows them to get what they want, which is of course the dismemberment of Russia. Any quick thoughts, Brian, and then we can move on.
Yes, I just want to remind people that because Russia was tied up in Ukraine, still is tied up in Ukraine, the United States was able to finally and fully dismember Syria. And then because that was a prerequisite for all-out war on Iran, advance that agenda toward actual war with Iran, which is still ongoing. It's paused. The outright fighting is paused. Everyone on all sides is getting ready for the next round. That is far from finished there. And I want to point out, yes, China has tremendous military power. It continues to grow. But I want to remind people that the United States, again, has this global spanning military, and the plans, the policies that they are putting into place and what they are actually physically preparing for is not to fight China and defeat it on its own territory or along its shores. It wants to create a conflict, raise the cost for China, and then also use any conflict as an excuse to cut off Chinese maritime shipping worldwide. They are putting the pieces into place to do this. And Danny, you were talking about this CSIS war game. I don't know if you mentioned it during the show, but before we went live, you were talking about CSIS, one of these corporate-funded think tanks. They were talking about wargaming, a Chinese blockade of their own island province of Taiwan, and all the different things that could happen. And one of the outcomes was the U.S. able to use that as a pretext to isolate China diplomatically, politically, economically. And that is, they will provoke this war. Whether they win it or not doesn't matter. They will use that as the pretext to cut Chinese maritime shipping, to isolate China, in all of the ways that it has tried to isolate Russia. I see people in the comment section confused about whether I'm saying the U.S. will win or not. I'm not saying that they're going to win or not win. I'm just saying people should not underestimate them. They are extremely dangerous, and what they lack in military-industrial production, they more than make up for in political meddling, subversion, and political capture.
Yeah, and I would say winning is really not the question for the U.S. foreign policy establishment anymore, because it's trying to hold on to an empire, and in many ways, China and Russia have won in so many critical categories. Brian, you mentioned earlier Russia's industrial military production. It's won that. I mean, it's done. That's happened. If the United States can prolong this long enough, maybe they can keep Ukraine and go on to other fronts like Moldova or whatever, and find ways to militarily and politically encircle Russia. But just on the pure facts of military industrial production, Russia has won that, and China economically has already won that. It's really a matter of other than maybe pure GDP terms, but it's really a matter of, for the United States, how can it stop that? And that's what it will do at all costs, maybe to the biggest cost, leading to the biggest cost, which is nuclear conflict, which Donald Trump is openly talking about as if it's a joke, and that is no joke. But I think this is a really good time, actually, since both of you referenced wargaming, China, Taiwan. There is a lot of alarm being spread about a Chinese invasion of Taiwan coming. And here is a Taiwan official, a lot of misreporting going on, but this seems to happen every some odd weeks, where we are told that some Taiwan-based official, this one's called the Deputy Foreign Minister. There's no such thing, but that's what they call themselves, since it is a province of China. But here is what he had to say regarding China and Taiwan.
The population need not to be naive like the past. China is preparing to invade Taiwan.
If an attack came in the next 18 months, is Taiwan ready? Is Taiwan prepared enough?
Taiwan alone, based on China, we will never be ready. It's not possible. China is so big, so huge. Maybe it's also the tactic of China trying to push Taiwan to the maximum, and then to be very nervous and wanting to become the one who will take the first action, or to shut the first.
You think that's right? They're actively trying to provoke a response.
Yeah, we suspect if one day China attack Taiwan, of course, it will be very bad for Taiwan. We will be destroyed.
So not a lot of optimism there, but a lot of blame and demonization of China nonetheless. And this you mentioned, and you've talked about, KJ, Taiwan's recall vote. So this happened twice in the last year. An attempt by the DPP, the separatist party, to take back the so-called legislative council. The frustration of this so-called grassroots campaign by the DPP to recall KMT legislators was really horrific. In July 26th, the first recall vote occurred actually in July 26th, and none of them, the KMT legislators, which is the nationalist party which fled to the Taiwan island after 1949, were recalled, and they are for, of course, One China, which is a thorn in the side of the U.S.-backed separatists. So before I get to the war games part of this, KJ, your reaction to the hype and the continual hype of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan?
Well, I mean, the first thing to point out is that it's not possible for a country to invade itself. Taiwan is part of China. It's a province of China. This is recognized by Chinese law. It's recognized by the Taiwan authorities' own constitution. Certainly, it's recognized by the United States, recognized by all the countries of the world. It's recognized by the United Nations. Taiwan is not a country. It is a province of China. It's a province that has pretensions to being something that it is not. It's very similar to the United States. The United States had a civil war. as the Civil War was coming to a close, the Confederates, they decamped and they escaped to Galveston Island off of Texas, and they were regrouping there. And if we can imagine the hypothetical where China had said to the Confederate Army decamped on Galveston Island, yes, you are the United States, and we will arm you and we will support you until you can take back the entirety of the United States. That's essentially what happened. It's a rump state masquerading as a country. And China, even so, has said that it does not want to wage war. It wants peaceful reunification. And essentially, China's great superpower is patience. It's willing to wait decades, if not hundreds of years, until Taiwan falls back into the fold, which I believe it will. But the problem is the United States. The United States has been weaponizing Taiwan. It's been using it as a forward military base. In fact, you can track the history of US relationships with China through phases of Taiwan's history. From 1949 until the mid-70s, Taiwan was a US forward military base on which the US actually parked nuclear weapons and was constantly threatening China. It went from being a military base into a kind of a US hedge, and that was the second phase of US-China relations, which was essentially détente. We're talking about, the three communiques and, Nixon and Kissinger in China, etc. The third phase, and during this period, Taiwan was used as a hedge, but it was not used overtly to wage war against China, but it was used as a way of subcontracting for dirty wars. And so, for example, the kind of dirty wars that the US was waging that were too dirty to be done on the books, even for the CIA, would be subcontracted to Taiwan Island. And then the Taiwan would, for example, engage in, they would train death squads in Latin America. The civil air transport, which is Taiwan's international carrier, was also called Air America. So they were used to smuggle drugs out of the Golden Triangle to fund dirty wars through Myanmar against China. And also Taiwan was used as a kind of a global clearinghouse for global fascism. It, supported Israel. It supported South Africa. When Israel was helping South Africa get the nuclear bomb, Taiwan was, major purchaser of uranium from South Africa. In fact, it contracted for 2,000 tons of uranium because they were all going to, turn themselves into nuclear states, and so on and so on. So it has been a bad actor throughout, and it's like a pawn which is posed on the 8th row of the chessboard. That is, you cannot ignore it because it poses an imminent threat. Certainly, if it's used as a gambit, then it has to be taken out immediately. So that's the threat. And this is what the United States is trying to do with Taiwan. It's been Ukrainizing it, for the past 5 years. And it's been trying to use it as a trigger to force China into some kind of kinetic response or even a blockade, and then to use that as a casus belli with which to pile on against China. It's as if, you're constantly on the basketball court, you're constantly driving into the paint and you're trying to draw the foul with the hope that once the foul is drawn, you can get everybody stirred up and everybody will come down from the bleachers and get into a huge fight. And that's essentially Elbridge Colby's strategy, what he calls strategy of denial. Essentially, use Taiwan to trigger a war, get all your allies to pitch in, and then have, a massive war against China. So all of this is so deeply and intricately set up. And, they've been doing this, or they've been, Elbridge Colby is talking about this for over a decade. But this is the situation, which is so extraordinarily hair trigger dangerous. And most recently, what the DPP did was something very similar to what Korea did. It knows that if it wants to trigger war, the vast majority of people on Taiwan Island are opposed to war. They want nothing to do with war because, everybody in China is their family. Literally, they're related by blood. They're essentially, 95% of the population have relatives in Fujian or China. They don't want to kill their own families. And so in order to make this happen, Taiwan has passed a series of regulations, among which are a kind of bringing back of military rule or martial courts, military courts, in order to have this kind of arbitrary capacity to shape action inside the country. And then they were trying to get rid of the opposition legislature, which is opposed to war, and essentially have a legislative coup so that they essentially have a unitary government. Now, this is parallel to what was happening in Korea, because, again, Korea is the other big flashpoint. Historically, Taiwan and Korea have always come together. They've always happened at the same time, at least 3 times in history. Anytime there's been an invasion of China, the 2 on-ramps have been Taiwan Island and the Korean Peninsula. But Korea just recently barely escaped a military coup. Yoon Suk-yeol was dead set on triggering a military coup in South Korea. And among his plans, he was going to trigger war with North Korea. We know this, with great certainty at this point, that the plan was to trigger war with North Korea by sending drones and lobbing missiles and doing all and creating, and killing off, South Korean legislators and blaming it on North Korean spies. And by triggering a war with North Korea, then South Korea would have reverted to a military dictatorship, and the US would have taken operational control over South Korea's 500,000 regular troops and 3.1 million reserve troops. That's extraordinary, military manpower that they would have then automatically assumed for their, military purposes. That was thwarted by the people rising up and, overthrowing and impeaching Yoon Suk-yeol, and who's now, facing charges of sedition and treason. But just before Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law, his chief of military intelligence went to Taiwan Island to coordinate with them. And the moment the military martial law was declared, Taiwan DPP government started to praise it in the media. And so you can see that it was a kind of coordinated plan. And once again, as I say, this harkens back to this period when Taiwan and South Korea and the Philippines and South Africa and Israel were this kind of global axis of pariah states that were the clearinghouse for global fascism as subcontractors to US imperial designs. That situation looks to be coming back. The most, striking example is the pager attack on Lebanon, which was done through a Taiwanese company, Gold Apollo, which made the pagers. They said they didn't. They say we just licensed our brand. But what company licenses its brand without doing any quality control, without knowing what its brand is being used for? They said, we don't know anything what happened. But they have never shown any contracts. They've never shown, what the exact agreement was. And why would you take a company, spend decades building up, and then simply traffic out your brand without doing any quality control, unless this was a highly coordinated intelligence operation, which everything seems to signal? That is a highly coordinated intelligence operation using Taiwan in its old role as a proxy for U.S. and the axis of fascist dirty wars.
Yeah, and Brian, before we get to the war games by CSIS recently conducted, very related, it seems, to this reaction by the separatists themselves of a coming invasion from China. What's your reaction first?
Well, I think KJ brought up a lot of really good points, and I think Taiwan is a perfect example of the power of American political capture and the way it's able to take an entire population and turn it against its own best interests and against its own survival, the physical survival. We were just listening to that man play acting as I think he was calling himself a minister of foreign affairs, something like that. He's talking
deputy
about
foreign minister. Yes, that's
yes, he's talking about we might get destroyed. Has he read the U.S. policy papers that say, yes, definitely Taiwan is going to get destroyed in any sort of war? And if China doesn't destroy the infrastructure and the industry on Taiwan, the United States itself will destroy it to deny it from falling into the hands of the rest of China. Did he read any of that? Does he look in the news and see what is happening to Ukraine right now at this time? And so obviously he knows all of these things. He doesn't care because he knows that when this happens, in his mind, he thinks, well, I'll just leave. Doesn't matter to me. It'll be all these ordinary people that are stuck with the consequences, my complicity in this U.S. agenda. He will be in the United States or in Europe. And if we look at the history of the U.S. capturing nations, coups, failed coups, these people stay in the country for as long as they can, and then when time is up, usually they will go back to the U.S. or Europe or wherever they were prepared, and that's where they will return. So this is a huge problem, and Taiwan is right off the coast of the rest of China, and yet China still has a problem trying to win over the information space, the education system, and the island province of Taiwan is dependent on the rest of China for its economy, its economic survival. And yet they're still struggling to do this. So this is a huge weakness, I think, of multipolarism. BRICS, the SCO, all of these groups, ASEAN, they for some reason they don't really seem to understand. I think China understands within mainland China, they understand information space is a national security domain. Russia obviously understands this, but their ability to help other nations in, say, BRICS, or nations that aspire to join BRICS, their ability to help nations defend information space as a national security domain is almost non-existent. I don't see any cooperation or any progress in this matter. And this is what allows the United States to get into a country and turn it against its own best interests and the best interests of multipolarism. And if you cannot do that, it doesn't matter how much military equipment you can produce every day, every month, every year. If a country does not have people willing to take up that equipment or will not point it in the right direction, then it's all for nothing. So this is something I think people need to concentrate more on. Multipolarism, the leaders of multipolarism, and we as individuals need to pay more attention to this.
Yeah. Well, the complications of China putting into its foreign policy information sharing, information technology sharing, all of this requires two to tango. And I think that's where the development of BRICS and multipolarity is really going to have to move forward on, which is the fact that there is, I think, a big move toward developing in all kinds of areas of economic and political, diplomatic, even military cooperation. But what you're talking about, Brian, requires a kind of shared vision that is still contested in the world. It is still very much contested of what that vision should be, what multipolarity should look like beyond win-win economic cooperation and economic growth, as important as that is, it's critical. I wanted, though, to play this video from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a State Department funded think tank. They recently wargamed a particular crisis that Taiwan is supposedly going to face and will face if it engages in a US-backed war with China. And it's going to be playing on, I believe, faster speed. It's a couple minutes long. So here we go.
Chinese blockade of Taiwan could trigger the greatest convoy battle since World War II. China would squeeze Taiwan's imports to force its surrender. Taiwan and its supporters, like the United States, would lose dozens of ships to keep supplies flowing. Blockade is not inevitable, but it is possible given China's rhetoric and military buildup. To understand how a blockade might play out, CSIS conducted 26 war games, ranging from low-level boarding and seizure to full-scale conventional conflict. Against boarding and seizure, Taiwan's forces could buy time, but China's massive military would eventually overwhelm them. A Ukraine strategy, where the United States provided support but no troops, did poorly, because it was so hard for shipments to get through without U.S. forces. Mid-intensity war games involved convoy battles. Sometimes the United States and Taiwan could keep Taiwan supplied, but at the cost of dozens, even hundreds of ships. 2 of the 5 free-play games escalated to high-intensity conventional conflict. Many game participants looked for ways around risky sea supply, remembering the Berlin airlift of 1948 to 1949.
I just want to apologize to all the viewers for the music of this video. It's very cringy, and it was impossible for me to. I tried to take it off, but let's continue.
However, Taiwan has 10 times the population. Even a massive airlift could provide only 2% of Taiwan's daily needs. Submarines and small craft could provide even less support. For China, a blockade risks heavy losses, a long war, and alienating the global community. The Berlin blockade led to the creation of NATO. China might engender a similar response. Every country on the planet would be affected because a blockade would disrupt international trade. Beyond strategy, economics, and logistics, the human cost of war would be staggering. It's a conflict that must be deterred. The question is, how? Taiwan can take steps to gain control of its cargo fleet in the event of an emergency, continue to build energy resilience, and sustain its last nuclear power plant. The United States must maintain its regional alliances and partnerships and develop off-ramps to give China a face-saving way out of a conflict. For the full CSIS report.
So, KJ, to you, your reaction to this report. Actually, let me just pull it up one more time because I wanted to show something in particular that was quite interesting. Let me just rewind here. Allies. I don't know if anyone can catch that flag, the rising sun flag, as part of the Allies. Let's just say that's a huge nod to Imperial Japan, fascist Japan. Anyway, I just found that to be a very interesting little visual reference there that they use. But to you, KJ, your assessment of this war games, these war games are happening all the time from think tanks like CSIS.
Yeah, just before I go that, let me a few words about the rising sun. Anybody who grew up in Asia knows that the rising sun is like the Nazi Hakenkreuz. You see it immediately. It brings together associations of unbridled genocidal violence. At one point, the Japanese marched down the Champs-Élysées, and the rising sun is the military banner. The Japanese national flag itself, is just a circle with a red. It's a white flag with a red circle on it. But the rising sun with those tentacles spreading out, is still the war banner of the Japanese military. And the Japanese were invited to, France, the Champs-Élysées, to parade with the French, and they brought the rising sun with them. And I and a group of people, we wrote to the French president and said, you've just broken French law, because French law says that you cannot display these kinds of symbols in public. And anybody who does that, has to be fined or arrested. And the French government actually responded, and they said, we apologize. They essentially came up with an apology. But this points out how extraordinarily triggering and how extraordinarily disrespectful it is to fly that. It really is the banner of genocide. For China alone, the Japanese killed somewhere between 27 to 35 million Chinese. That rising sun, the military, the Japanese military flying the rising sun, made the Nazis look like Boy Scouts, and I'm not exaggerating. So anyway, that's an entire different topic. But yes, these CSIS exercises are a message to China. What we do know is that if the United States were to engage in any kind of conventional battle over Taiwan Island with China, it would lose. And there are many reasons for this, but the key reason is, first, the tyranny of distance. The United States is thousands of miles away. The second piece is that Taiwan is a small island. Much as they would like to Ukrainize it, The difficulty is that it's an island, which means that it can be easily blockaded. You know, Ukraine is large landmass with multiple borders, with multiple NATO states, so they've been able to, you know, keep the supply lines going. But Taiwan is an island. And if it were blockaded, it has about 10 days of natural gas and a few weeks of coal and oil. And after that, it would essentially die from energy starvation. And so what CSIS is doing, and they do this every few months, every 6 months, every year, they come up with new exercises. And what they try and do is they try and massage the military exercises, the war game, simulation, to show that the United States can win this war, that it can prevail, and that it can, and that it will, exert tremendous, damages to China. And as I said, this is a signal to China. They're saying to the Chinese, look, we can win this war. Don't even think about it. The second is they're sending a signal to themselves, saying, yes, we can win this war. Whatever Lyle Goldstein, who really knows the situation, is wrong. Lyle Goldstein says, don't even go there. It is our war to lose. We would have our rear end kicked, in 3 seconds flat. And he's been studying it for 25 years. He knows what he's talking about. But CSIS, wants to put forth the neocon aggressive agenda that, this is a war that we can win and that they can deter a Chinese aggression. When they say deter, of course, it means to provoke, because that's ultimately, as Albrecht Kolbe said, the strategy of denial is really a matter of driving into the paint, provoking China, and then getting everybody else to pile on. And so CSIS is always doing this. CSIS is a think tank. It's like the CFR, or Center for New American Security. It's one of these incredibly hawkish think tanks who started by Henry Kissinger. And their message always is that, even though it seems like a war that is ours to lose, yes, here is the pathway to win. And by doing so, we send a message to US allies. Yes, you have to join us and make sure you get into the fight. Sends a message to China. We're serious about waging war, even though we have to lie through our teeth through these fake simulations that are so full of ridiculous assumptions that, you kind of have to, it's just a package of lies. And then it's also a message to themselves. Yes, we can do this. It's a kind of a self-affirmation. Yes, we can win this war. Yes, US can win this war because CSIS said so. So it's thoroughly shot through with stupidity and corruption, but it's also a very, very dangerous signal, because it shows that they're putting a lot of money and effort into thinking through how they can wage this war, and both signal that they can win it, but also think, tactically, strategically, operationally. These are the things that we actually have to prepare in order to go to war.
Yeah, and a lot of this, Brian, has been in response to the fact that China has simulated. They have not actively maybe a quote unquote blockade, but they have simulated quite intense naval drills following what they see as illegal visits by so-called Taiwan officials, either visits from U.S. officials to Taiwan, like Nancy Pelosi a few years back, or of course the Kevin McCarthy visit. I think that was last year, or was it the year before that? Either way, there have been visit after visit of so-called U.S. and Taiwan officials, and that's what usually sparks this, or weapons transfers. But Brian, what do you make of the results of what CSIS says, and anything else you want to comment on with regard to this particular war games? Because I know you follow these think tanks quite closely.
Yes, I agree with KJ. I don't think the United States would win this, but is that necessarily their objective? Do they want to provoke? Because that's what they're doing. They're provoking a war over Taiwan. They're doing it by the way, they're doing it in violation of their own recognition of the One China policy, which is also upheld under international law. Taiwan is part of China, according to everybody. I mean, even people who don't recognize the One China policy, what they recognize instead is the administration on the alien province of Taiwan as the government of all of China. Nobody on planet Earth recognizes Taiwan as an independent country. No one, not a single country, not that I know of. but I want to point out something that that video pointed out. They said, if this happened, if China tried to implement a blockade of the island province of Taiwan, it would alienate China, and that means politically and economically. And then they talk about the blockade of Berlin that triggered the creation of NATO, and this could create another organization like NATO, an Asian NATO essentially, which is something they're already trying to build. And because they can't build it, they're trying to extend NATO's mandate over to Asia. And we've been talking, all of us have been talking about this for the last couple of years. This was going on under probably the first Trump administration, all throughout the Biden administration, and it continues to this day. So what they want to do is provoke China into implementing this blockade, or reacting in some way where they can make a case to isolate China economically, politically, diplomatically, and also coerce nations into picking a side. Are you going to pick what? Just think about the day after Russia went into Ukraine in 2022, February 2022, and all of these nations were put on a spot. Are you going to side with us, or are you going to side with Russia? And nobody sided with Russia. There were many countries that backtracked from that later, but at that moment, everybody was coerced into siding with the United States. They're going to do the exact same thing when they provoke this conflict with China over the status of Taiwan. And that is going to be the impetus that they use to work on these other strategies they're working on. So no, they're not going to try to fight and win a war against China. They'll try to make any fight that takes place as costly as possible for China. They have said in policy paper after policy paper, including CSIS and in previous reports, that the island province will be scoured of industry and infrastructure. There will be nothing left. Whether they win or they don't win, it doesn't matter. That will all be gone. But what they really want to do is this bigger picture encirclement and containment of China that they really can't put in place with tariffs and with the hybrid warfare that they've been using all the way up until now. Although that all continues to ramp up, all of that will accelerate exponentially if this were to happen. That's the actual game the U.S. is playing at, and CSIS is just reflecting something that the establishment has been working on and putting the pieces into place for years and years up until now. I always bring this up. Under the Biden administration, the entire Marine Corps was reconfigured. All of their tanks that they had been using for decades and decades in conflicts all around the world, they got rid of those, and now they are strictly a maritime interdiction force. They are meant to interdict maritime forces or shipping. That is their purpose now. And that is what they are now, under the Trump administration, training to do in the Asia-Pacific region. And so if this conflict were to take place, they would use the Marine Corps to interdict Chinese maritime shipping and also naval forces. The U.S. Air Force is practicing dispersing their forces to fight China and prevent China from overwhelming a handful of U.S. air bases. Now there are many more air bases China would be required to hit and constantly hit to keep them out of operation. And so this is what is shaping up. A lot of people think the United States isn't going to go to war with China, but they're already at proxy war with Russia. They already fought open war with Iran. This is coming. I always point out the people behind these policies, they are immune from the consequences. Everybody else will pay the consequences. Everyone in Asia will pay. The American people will pay. America's armed forces will pay. These people will be the last people on earth that will pay the consequences. Until that calculus changes, their mindset is going to remain locked in this direction. As KJ said, they only go forward. They never reverse gear. If they go into neutral, it's just so they can go forward again.
Yeah. And I want to now finally, given all that we've talked about here, I want to bring up just something for because I do think that when it comes to these war games, when it comes to this aggression toward China, toward Russia, we are seeing, I think, some headway in terms of a real response that doesn't get much attention, but when it does, it's usually Western media hype. And so I wanted to actually pull up what China and Russia are doing right now. They are holding joint naval drills off of Vladivostok, and according to U.S. military sources, China is sending submarine to Russia during these exercises for the first time, and that's according to Army recognition. The Chinese flotilla includes a Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine originally built in Russia, as well as two Type 52D class-guided missile destroyers, the Xiaoxing and Urumqi, which is not unironically the capital of Xinjiang. And then I want to pull up why Russia and China might be getting more militarily involved with each other. So some may know the big monopoly Palantir, a huge supporter of the Trump administration, especially J.D. Vance, who comes out of that ilk, comes out of this corporation. So Palantir just recently received a $10 billion contract from the U.S. military, U.S. Army, the Defense Department, in order to take care of the software and data analysis of the U.S. military. And for those who aren't familiar with Palantir in the realm of geopolitics, it's really, I think, noteworthy to note that its founder, Palantir's Alex Karp, says that the U.S. is going to very likely fight a three-front war against Russia and China. He said this last year in 2024, that Russia, China, and Iran are going to be the targets of U.S. war. And it just so happens that this gentleman is one of the biggest donors to the military-industrial complex and one of the biggest forces in the military-industrial complex itself. So I wanted to raise that, KJ, in the overall context of what we've been talking about, but your reaction to this.
So this is how the United States thinks that it's going to win the war. First, it's going to win in the digital domain, which, as I said over and over again, and I agree with Brian, digital sovereignty is key because the US excels in digital coups. And China is actually helping the Global South build out digital sovereignty through the digital Silk Road. This was what Huawei was doing when the United States went after Huawei and they actually kidnapped their CFO. So this shows you, that the stakes are very, very high, and both parties are aware that, this is the case. But the thing to understand about Palantir and all the other AI companies is that they have been inducted into war. They're part of the military industrial AI system that the United States thinks it can leverage to win a war. Why do they think that? Well, the genesis of AI itself started in military purposes. One part of it was so that the United States could continue fighting after life had been wiped out, that you had automated, like the dead hand, that you had automated battle management where, missiles could continue to be fired even after human life had been wiped out. That was actually explicit in the early, vision of AI. And then the other piece of it is, it's what we refer to as generative AI right now, all the stuff that we see with LLMs, etc. All of that comes out of neural networks. Neural networks were originally based on a model of the brain called the perceptron. It was a kind of digital analog model of the brain that simulated what scientists thought the neurons did. It was simulating the patterns of the retina. And the original perceptron built in the 1950s was to accelerate recognition and targeting for military purposes. And that genesis and that DNA continues to this day. So you saw all the accelerated targeting done by Palantir through Where's Daddy and Lavender, which they used to accelerate the genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza. So this application of AI for war is very, very concrete. It's already happening. And it ties into the larger model of war, which the US has been using or planning against China, which is, as I said, the 3Ds: diffusion, dispersion, and distribution, which Brian has pointed out. You can see in the agile combat formations that the Marines are rehearsing. Also, another dimension is disguise. So these disguised attacks, the Lebanon pager attack, the Internet of Dangerous Things, the attack on Russia. These are ways of using disguise. And another form of disguise or subterfuge is subsurface warfare. So using submarines. Submarines will be a large part of the war doctrine, as well as, diffused, dispersed, and distributed long-range fires. And then another dimension of the third offset is autonomy. So having autonomous fighting platforms that are AI powered. This is very, very large part of what the United States is currently trying to develop. They want to see if they can use AI to accelerate military advantage in order to destroy China on the battlefield. And so Palantir, is one of the key players, as is, Palmer Luckey and Oculus and, they're all involved. They're all involved feeding at the trough on this AI-enabled war racket that they're trying to drum up. And of course, Alex Karp is especially dangerous. They all are, because they really all are. And I say this with all seriousness, they all are insane. But not only are they insane, they don't know what they're doing. Alex Karp doesn't have a background in engineering. He actually has a degree in classics. So, really, this is the kind of ultimate white Western supremacist discipline that is all about maintaining class. That's what classics is about. It's about maintaining, privilege and class, and giving markers of it based on, Western, Western texts. But anyway, he really is a rabid xenophobe who doesn't know what he's doing, but is deeply indoctrinated and has, deeply inhaled, the anti-China hatred. And at the same time, he is this, I think, neurodiverse, rabid militarist. And it's people like Karp and Peter Thiel and Palmer Luckey that are saying that they are going to create the killer app that is going to destroy China. And they believe, they say this over and over again. Every day I wake up, Palmer Luckey said, every day I wake up and think about how am I going to destroy my enemies, and then, names China for it. So we have, this kind of policy which is driven by this infernal fascist enmeshing of militarized corporations and rabid neocons with an agenda to destroy China and to maintain white Western supremacy, hegemony. And I think this is what makes this moment so dangerous. And of course, they're breaking every single law in the book. Just a sidebar comment. If the United States were ever to get involved in a war over Taiwan, it would be considered a war of aggression, because foreign interference in a civil war, which is what this is a violation of international law. So the US would be actually engaging in a war of aggression against China. And then, we'd have all the crises in the UN and international law as well. So.
Yeah, Brian, to this question, what do you see as the importance of, to the other side of this, Russia and China's increasing military cooperation, but overall this partnership, the importance of it, given that there is a literal agenda from the most powerful forces, the Palantir, Peter Thiel, Alex Karp. These are powerful monopolists who literally dictate U.S. foreign policy. There's an agenda against both of them, and then we can throw in Iran there too as the pillars of multipolarity. What do you see as the importance of this increasing cooperation, especially among the heads, as the U.S. State Department, the Department of Defense would see it, the heads of the multipolar snake, which is Russia and China.
As well, they have to cooperate militarily. They not only need to demonstrate their own ability to deter Western encroachment and aggression, but they have to work together to amplify this deterrent. And, you know, again, that is necessary. They need to do that, and the more, the better. But the problem is there's many other areas they definitely need to work on. And we talked about the digital Silk Road a little bit earlier. And yes, they were building out the physical infrastructure, 5G. And yes, we saw the United States very actively go out against that. But what they need to do is a digital Silk Road in terms of the flow of information, social media platforms. Again, the U.S. is dangerous militarily and economically, but again, its absolute most successful and effective superweapon is its ability to politically capture targeted nations. And if, just for example, we're on YouTube right now, and someone like me, if I want to talk to people around the world, even if I want to talk to people in outside of the West, I still need to use social media platforms completely controlled by the United States, by Silicon Valley, by these billionaires, by these corporations that are driving U.S. foreign policy. And why has Russia, China, and other nations in the multipolar world allowed this to persist for so long? They have their own domestic, Russia, China, a couple of other countries have created their own domestic social media platforms for their people to secure their information space. But there is nothing that binds the multipolar world together, something that is out of reach of the collective West to manipulate and censor the algorithm. Manipulating the algorithm on Facebook, Meta, before Twitter, now X, YouTube. This is part of gaining control of people's minds, winning them over, shaping their ideology, shaping what they think their best interests are, to the point where they are actually working against their own survival, their own peace, stability, and prosperity. And so I think, yes, it's good that they're cooperating militarily, and they need to do more of that urgently. And maybe that's why they're doing this first, because it is so urgent. But they also need to work in these other areas. It's so important. And KJ was talking about AI and how the collective West wants to leverage AI as a force multiplier. They understand that on the battlefield, face to face with Russia or China or Iran, they will lose. So they're trying to use AI to give them an advantage. And they think in their mind, this will enable them to fight these other nations in the same way that the conquistadors used metal armor and firearms against locals who just had, they were basically shirtless and they had bows and arrows and spears. This is what they, in their mind, they want to create that sort of military disparity between themselves and these nations they want to subjugate. So we have to keep a close eye on all of these realms, not just the military battlefields, military production, but these other areas where maybe it's a bit even, because yes, China and Russia are working on AI. And then in other areas like controlling information space, where the US still holds supremacy.
Yeah, KJ, comment on this, because one of the big issues here is that Russia and China and the multipolar world, of course, they need the military cooperation is necessary, and Russia and China and Iran, really, those are the three pillars of the multipolar world that are able to and are engaging in increasing that cooperation and strengthening each other. But on the other hand, it's difficult to compete with a rabid empire that's willing to invest everything into what Brian is talking about, this information weapon, using information as a weapon, when China, Russia, Iran have to be, in order for them to exist, have to be attuned to the needs of their own people. And then, of course, the needs of a multipolar world that might come first, as Brian even referenced, right? Maybe defense, security, and then, of course, economic development, which if you don't have that, you're not going to have much support for it. So, KJ, your comments on this situation.
It's a very difficult situation. I've said this before, but the United States it's like somebody in a school shooter mode. I mean, the other people, they just want to go about their life, take their classes, go about normally. And the US is in a school shooter mode. So how do you deal with it? Do you tackle them? Do you go after them? Do you hide? Do you evade? This is the question of our moment, is how do you disarm? How do you diffuse the school shooter without getting everybody killed? And of course, as we've said before, digital sovereignty is a very, very important part of it. I've said that, what everybody needs to do is they need to consider that mental space is a warfighting domain, and they have to make sure that their minds are not occupied, because that is literally what is happening. They have to reclaim their own minds, prevent their minds from being colonized and turned into bots for, the propagation of, weaponized propaganda. The US has been doing this for a very long time. As I said, US invented marketing, and it invented public relations. It invented the revival tent and religious fanaticism inside Protestantism. So it's been doing this for a long time. It's very good at this. And, even more directly, Stanford University has been teaching courses on digital coups, how to, coup countries through digital means for about 25 years. It's been done by a guy called Larry Diamond, who's one of the leaders, or the eminence grise, the gray cardinal of the NED. And Amy Goodman gets him on her show she gets him on her show, and she never reveals that this guy is, he's the gray cardinal of the NED. But digital sovereignty is key. So we have to understand that. And then the other thing that we also can place a little bit of hope on, once again, we have to be careful. You can't be too optimistic. You can't be too pessimistic. You have to find that Goldilocks zone. Do not be arrogant, because, the one on the right was damned, do not despair. The one on the left was saved, etc. So we have to walk a very, very fine line, but we have to understand that, currently the empire is eating itself from within. As I said, the four horsemen: deindustrialization, financialization, hyper-financialization. It simply wants to claim rents off of everything, of which Peter Thiel is one of these people. He knows that the entire system is corrupt and broken, but he wants to see if he can, grab and loot while it is still working. So hyper-financialization is a problem. And then we have the problem of de-skilling. The US can no longer build things. Not only can it not build things industrially, but actually it doesn't really have the capacity to do meaningful cognitive labor anymore. Most of the cognitive labor is done through cognitive sweatshops that have been outsourced to, the global south. And one example of this is most of the AI researchers are actually Chinese. 50%, over 50% of the top AI researchers are Chinese. Mark Zuckerberg, created this AI dream team. I think most of them are Chinese. And so essentially, what this boils down to is, if we think of war as being not simply a matter of logistics or industry or strategy or tactics, but we think of it as a kind of a contest of learning curves, then the US is way behind on that learning curve. It has, left every child's behind. In particular, AI itself is simply applied math. People think that, AI is something magical. No, it's just math. Computer science is just applied math. And when you have a math contest, the US doesn't come out ahead, because the US leadership is a leadership led by lawyers, and most lawyers don't do math. Certainly Peter, Alex Karp, I don't believe that he can do, math worth, anything. So in a math contest, when you have the mathematicians fighting the lawyers, I think the mathematicians are going to come out ahead. And we see this with things like DeepSeek, where simply they took the AI algorithms and improved them without having to increase compute. So I think that China will eventually pull ahead in AI, in particular in embodied AI, and that's where the industrial capacity also ties into the the AI development and the the large language models, because ultimately intelligence is a matter of inhabiting the world and being able to navigate the world. And in order to do that, you need industrial capacity with industrial robots that have autonomy, that can learn in their interactions with the world around them, that knowledge is considered as this entire world and its interactions and connections. And in that sense, China has the advantage, whereas the US is just barely doing its coding and trying to run up some kind of advantage with massive amounts of compute and advanced chips, and even those are starting to be overtaken by China. So ultimately, time is on China's side. Time is on the side of the global South, and essentially, we can say that the superpower of the global South is patience. So if we can just avoid war over the next 2 to 5 years, then I think the disparities will be so big that the chances of war will be significantly diminished. But we just have to get through this, dark tunnel, this dark night of aggression, which is very, very thick and dark and frightening at the current moment.
Yeah, and in about a minute or 2 minutes or less or so for both of you, if possible, just your final analysis on how I kind of sum things up to see is that on the one hand, you have the danger that you bring up, Brian. Certainly, the U.S. empire is not out, even if it is down. It is very dangerous, and I believe its desperation and its decline, taking risks or moving toward escalations, which are going to and already are, if Gaza, if Iran, if Lebanon, if Ukraine. I mean, all of these wars and conflicts, and with Gaza genocide, I mean, the casualty count is just absolutely astonishing. And then there are moves, for example, like the economic war on China, the tariffs, the sanctions on Russia, the war on BRICS that Trump is trying to engender, that have a kind of boomerang effect. I mean, right now, Brian, so I get your comments first, you have Scott Bessent, and not only are they going after Brazil, which is standing really defiant, and Lula is, talking like urging the global South to dump the dollar and to begin to build that mechanism to do that. They're going after India now, which is quite the strategic blunder, in my opinion. But here's what Scott Bessent is saying about negotiations with India.
And also, India's been a large buyer of sanctioned Russian oil that they then resell as refined products. So, they have not been a great global actor.
So India is supposed to be the proxy for the U.S. against China. It's supposed to do its bidding on the foreign policy realm. And the Trump administration has been going after essentially anybody and everybody on this. And essentially the positive I see in this moment is that if there is this common vision that I think is needed for a BRICS and a multipolar world, certainly the U.S.'s own actions could help facilitate that. But Brian, your final comments, and then KJ.
I think KJ made a really good point. He's talking about the multipolar world and how time is working in its favor, and how patience and the ability to avoid a major war that would burn everything down that everyone is working so hard to build up, that is central. And if the multipolar world can make it through these next couple of years, then there will be this disparity between the rest of the world and the West and its vision of reasserting itself. But the problem is the United States right now, we can see examples of this right now where they just don't care anymore about pretexts, an excuse to go to war. They were literally negotiating. Iran was negotiating with the U.S., which they had no reason to negotiate with the U.S. The U.S. is not in charge of of global nuclear programs, but they were negotiating to avoid a war, and the U.S. just attacked Iran in the middle of negotiations. So they have become so reckless and aggressive, and they're doing things on impulse because they know they're out of time. But this is extremely dangerous. That border conflict was engineered by U.S.-backed political forces on both sides of the border, here in Thailand and in neighboring Cambodia. And then the trade deal was rammed through on both sides while everybody was distracted by the conflict. Nobody had a chance to debate the U.S. trade demands, basically, not a deal. And nobody had any time to protest it. And if you look at the concessions that were forced on Thailand and Cambodia, they're putting 0 tariffs on U.S. products. They still get tariffs from the U.S., 19%, 20%, something like that. And they are being forced to buy LNG, and they're being forced to buy huge amounts of Boeing aircraft that nobody needs. And a lot of these countries use Airbus. And to switch over to another airliner is not like switching over to, I was driving a Kia, now I'm driving an Audi. It's not like that. You have to make huge investments on all of the things that support that aircraft on the ground and in the air. And they also had to make concessions to the US regarding Google and Amazon regarding these digital services and infrastructure that are only going to enhance America's control and ability to project political control over these targeted nations. So this is a huge threat. They're going for everything all at once. They don't care how it looks. They picked Trump on purpose because then they can just say, well, that was Trump. We all know he was crazy and impulsive. That was him. That had nothing to do with what America really stands for. This is what they do with every presidential administration. They flush everything, all responsibility down the toilet every time there's a new administration. Everything else gets flushed down with the previous administration. So this is what they're doing, and they're more dangerous and desperate now than ever. And people have to look at the big picture, not get focused too much on any one conflict, see how they all work together, and see how all of these conflicts work together with the tariffs, with propaganda, with the media, with all of these distractions they try to use to divide us. We have to look at all of it as one single push by the U.S. to reassert itself globally.
Yeah, KJ, your final comments.
Yeah, I've said this before, and I hate to keep repeating myself, but U.S. is like a drunk at the bar, and the bar is closing, and the drunk needs to go home. The credit cards are being rejected, struck out with everybody, and it's just time to go home. But the drunk doesn't want to go home, and they want to fight, and they're willing to fight the entire everybody there. And so this is the dangerous piece. And what it's also doing is it's bullying its sidekicks right now. So you can see that even the countries that are the closest to the United States are getting really, really raw deals because the U.S. decides that it can twist its, quote unquote allies or its vassals the most. And so, it's that situation where the bully, after having bullied everybody but no longer capable of bullying other people, decides to bully their own sidekicks. The best example, as you just pointed out, is India. I've been doing journalism for a long time. We used to call it the Asia Pacific. That was my beat, was the Asia Pacific. And then sometime around the Biden administration, it became the Indo-Pacific, which is a kind of nonsense term. I mean, it's a 19th century Bismarckian colonial term. But the reason why we started using the term Indo-Pacific, as well as the Indo-Pacific strategy, which is really another rebranded pivot to Asia, is that they wanted India to be the left tackle in this rising Pacific war. Japan, Korea are the right tackle. India is the left tackle. And in order to, make this very, very clear, we're going to call it the Indo-Pacific, and we're going to have an Indo-Pacific strategy. Well, that didn't turn out so well because, India is a big country and it has a kind of, dual alliance. It's very close to Russia. When the war in Ukraine broke out, India decided it was going to continue relations with Russia. It was not going to sanction Russia. And then this put it in the doghouse. And so now it is, being thrashed. And so, the original notion of the Quad, which was Australia, Japan, India, and the US, that has, nobody's talking so much about that anyway. So they want to see if they can thrash India and continue the beatings until the morale improves, until the, imperial vassal mentality improves. But once again, the empire is imploding. The drunk is picking fights everywhere, and they're also sending the message that anything goes. We are crazy. We can do anything. That's the message, really, of Gaza. That there's no limits to our depravity and violence. And so, once again, we have to come back to what can we do? We have to see if we can de-escalate. We have to see if we can get the drunk to calm down, go home, go to sleep. And in the meantime, we also have to make sure that we are not being captured as vectors of propaganda for this incredibly violent but absurd information war that is being waged right now. Just remember, the farther we are from truth, the closer we are to war. Those who tell you absurdities are preparing you for atrocities.
Yeah, and I'll just close on this. I want to thank all the super chats, by the way, and comments here, super stickers, and thanks, Tom, for being a member for so long.
Welcome back there.
Your smile, Nima. I'm here because of your smile. And everybody, look, if the Wi-Fi is not very good, I am surrounded by water. I was trying to explain to Nima. The sea is right here to my right, 10 meters away. I was sailing this morning. And we are surrounded by sea around here, and the only link to firm land is on my left. So there's water all over. So obviously for waves is not very good. I mean, electronic waves, internet. So if I disappear, it's okay. I have not plunged in the Gulf of Morbihan, at least not yet. I did this morning.
I wouldn't start, Pepe, with what has happened between Russia and the United States in terms of nuclear submarines that the United States has decided to send to close to Russia. And Donald Trump is talking about it's a response to Medvedev, what Medvedev said. And here is what he said. He tries to do something to add some sort of information that doesn't make sense, but here is what he said.
They put out a statement, and the answer is they are in the region, yeah, where they have to be.
Is it what Steve Witkoff's message will be to the Russians? Is there anything they can do to avoid sanctions at this point?
Yeah, get a deal where people stop getting killed. They had a number that just came out that a tremendous number of Russian soldiers are being killed. And likewise, Ukraine, a lower number, but still thousands and thousands of people. And now we're adding towns where they're being hit by missiles. So it's a lot of people being killed in that ridiculous war. And, we stopped a lot of countries from war, India and Pakistan. We stopped a lot of countries. And we're going to get that one stopped too. Somehow we're going to get that one stopped. That's a really horrible.
Yeah. He's talking about the casualties on the part of Ukrainians and Russians, but the number he's putting out is somehow outrageous. They don't have anything to do with the reality of what's going on. He's talking about 112,000 soldiers, Russian soldiers, being killed since January this year. When it comes to Ukrainians, he's talking about 8,000 soldiers. Your take on what's going on?
Well, this is what happens when you have a ridiculous president of the United States who is incapable of checking basic numbers. He doesn't. It's whatever his in his entourage and the Russophobes of Trump 2.0 or whatever they tell him, and obviously doesn't check, he then, regurgitates these numbers, which are completely ridiculous, coming from somebody who should be extremely well informed. Look, we're getting to the point, Nima, and our audience, where anything that comes out from Donald Trump should be completely ignored, because the bullshit quotient would always be stratospheric. It already is, by the way. The problem is, because he is the president of the United States, every misplaced comma in his speech is reproduced ad infinitum across the planet, and dominates the news cycle, and goes to the next day, until he has another torrent of bullshit imprinted in our brains day after day. So this is an absolutely ghastly exercise for all of us, for the whole planet, in fact. Well, and his credibility, even now, is now approaching less than zero quotients. Really. The fact that you have a president that is irked by comments on social media by a former president of Russia, and then he displaces 2 nuclear submarines. In fact, he didn't displace anything. These American submarines, they're always on patrol, whatever they may be. Around it could be the coast of the U.S., the Pacific coast of the U.S. It could be in the middle of the Pacific. It could be in the Western Pacific, closer to Japan or Korea, for that matter. Not very close to the Russian borders in the Pacific, to the east of Russia and Siberia, of course, because then the Russians will be way more forceful. So these submarines are out there. And the Russian submarines, as we all know, they are out there patrolling as well, including the mother of all disasters, the Belgorod, the nuclear Belgorod, which is capable by itself to reduce whole nation states to nothing, literally. But this macho man act now, can you imagine that we still have to put up with that for another 3.5 years? And after 6 months, nobody can stand it anymore. So in terms of displacing the conversation from serious issues and becoming a reiteration of macho man proclamation after macho man proclamation, it works because people forget about discussing serious issues like the reasons for the war in Ukraine, for that matter, initiated by the empire, his government, even before his government and during his first term, conducted by his first term as well, to discuss, spats on social media. It's absolutely pathetic. And at the same time, it's a reflection of our times, right, Nima? The absolute imbecilization of discourse, of debate, of critical thinking, of people who still have their critical faculties and know how to act rationally. When we have the president of the United States acting like a temper tantrum, non-stop, 24/7, 5-year-old, this is what we get. It's beyond pathetic, the whole thing. And here we are talking about it again.
Pepe, I don't know if you saw the interview that the former Israeli intelligence had on, I would assume it on Russian media, but it's in English, but I don't know, it was on RT or something else. And he was mentioning the links between the Epstein files and Donald Trump. Many people, when we try to understand the behavior of Donald Trump, would comparing to what he was talking before being elected. He was talking, you remember, he was talking nicely about Iran and Russia and how the future can change. How can we support dollar in terms of not destroying dollar, but he's doing each and everything that he was criticizing before being elected. Many people are trying to understand what is behind this sort of strange behavior of Donald Trump. And here is what one of the issues that can be mentioned. Here is the Epstein and what the former Israeli intelligence said.
Epstein's lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, came on this show, the emeritus professor of law at Harvard, and said, no, Trump's behavior as regards Gaza, as regards bombing Iran, as regards bombing Yemen, all his behavior can't be explained by any blackmail tapes of Trump. Do you believe in any way that the genocide in Gaza is being prolonged by the late Jeffrey Epstein?
I certainly believe that the Israelis are making sure that the Americans do not stop them from the killing in Gaza. I believe that the American government is sort of trapped by the Israelis. Jeffrey Epstein is one of their tools to trap them.
And what do you think of Dershowitz's denial?
Hold on a second. I want to give you an example. Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton, Ehud Barak, met Arafat in the 90s, and there was no deal. The reason was Epstein. They were being blackmailed by Epstein. Ehud Barak was also a friend of Epstein, the prime minister of Israel at the time. But he was being blackmailed by the Israeli right wing as well. And they stopped an agreement with Arafat. They were about to reach an agreement there for a two-state solution. But that was stopped because of Epstein. They were both being blackmailed by Epstein.
Ehud Barak has been on. Ehud Barak has been on this show. He walked off this show. People can look it up, and that was not because I asked him about any blackmail alleged evidence against him.
You get to the root causes of this sort of behavior. You see that they're so deep. There are not just one Epstein. I would argue that many Epsteins are living, and we don't know any of them.
Of course, but this it's standard Mossad procedure, Nima. They always did that. In fact, this is one of the things that they really know what to do. Establish a network of blackmail, ironclad, with multiple actors and some key actors infiltrated at the highest levels of power and finance. And of course, everybody knew that Barak was part of the whole Epstein episode. Like Bill Clinton, like Donald Trump, like Bill Gates, like Tony Blair. We all know that. We know that for years. Did anything happen? No, of course not. Did Trump fool his MAGA base about it? Of course he did. Is he under the, I would say, total control of the Zionist axis? Of course he is. And that explains Gaza, that explains Iran, that explains no accommodation with Russia. That explains everything, and the war on BRICS as well. Part of the rationale of the war on BRICS as well. And what Trump contributes, let's put it this way, to the war on BRICS is that red flashing series of lights, actually, when, for instance, Lula says, like Lula said yesterday, for instance, I'm not interested in having the continuation of the dollar dominating international relations, international transactions. This for Trump is like, it's the bull in the arena. This is the total red flag for him. It's the only thing that his brain registers, in fact. So the war against Lula, specifically in Brazil, is just beginning. It's going to get beyond nasty. And all the levers of power of Trump 2.0, this will go all the way. And if you thought that car wash operation, and everything that led to whacking Dilma from her post as president and throwing Lula in jail. If you thought this was hardcore, just wait to what they are preparing next. They already identified Brazil as the weak link in their minds, of course. What they can do to Russia and India, there are serious limits, but with Brazil, no holds barred. They're going to throw everything against the Brazilian economy, against Brazilian connections. Obviously, against Brazilian diplomacy, there's no diplomacy because Lula and the Brazilian foreign minister have said, we've been trying to talk to them, and they don't want to talk. No, they don't want to talk. They want to destroy Brazil as an emerging sovereign power, period. That's it. And this is something that people in Brazil have to understand how serious it is now. In the case of Russia, Russia has already understood that the war of Europe against Russia is a forever war. There will never be peace between Europe and Russia, period. And when I say Europe, I say Brussels and Brussels running Europe. I'm not talking about individual nation states. That's different. The French, I was having this discussion among the few political discussions that I've been having here, on and off in some dinners, etc., and people who don't follow politics, but they are French patriots, which is always wonderful to discuss with, and they are not prejudiced, and per se they don't have prejudice against Russia. They always ask, all these things that they say about Russia, is it true? Then you have to explain to them that they are not, right? For instance, yesterday I was navigating in a port near here, and I saw a wall, fantastic graffiti on a wall. Loosely translated means Breton, which, from Bretagne, where I am. Yes. French, no. So this is the true Europe of regions, where for them the region is much more important than the nation state, and obviously much more important than Brussels, which is an unelected bureaucracy. So they're deeply attached to their land, to their values, to their own culture, and to their region. You see? So this is the deep Europe that you see only when you escape from the capitals. You see? And these people, they are open to hear from about Asia, about the US, and they say, look, we don't watch TV anymore. We don't trust the media anymore. We don't read papers anymore. They are attuned to their local, regional, traditional, conservative values and their culture, but they are not against the rest of the world, or even against Asia, or against China for that matter. So there are glimmers of hope, even around here in NATO-stan. But in terms of Russia and China, when they look at these explosions of stupidity coming out of Trump on a daily basis, they have no illusions. The Russians know that the war by Europe against them will be eternal. They know that there won't be a sort of American-conducted sort of peace with Russia, also including Ukraine. Forget it. Now they already know about it. And in fact, the FSP, the SVR, they are already analyzing the new provocations that are going to start coming, especially from the Brits or organized by the Brits. And China also, they already know that accommodation with the US, okay, it can last 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, but then they'll come up with something else, because they are the ultimate existential threat to this former rules-based international order, now no rules-based international disorder under Trump. So no illusions whatsoever. And I would say that Iran, apparently, they are finally waking up to the fact that there is no possible accommodation with these people. that there will be another attack against Iran sooner or later by the Zionist axis, by Israel and the US. Probably no, most certainly a conjunction of both. So the Iranians are preparing themselves for it. So, it's the whole framework is the clash is going to get much worse. And that's what, for all of us who try to analyze what's going on, it's very disheartening. And it's after a while, we get so tired of it. We just want to, okay, let's disappear in another galaxy, because whatever we do is not going to change anything. And it's going down by the day. This the fact that Trump now is even more frustrated because he has not been able to clinch any sort of deal or something that he could sell to his domestic public opinion like a deal. So he's bragging about stuff he doesn't even know about. He's bragging that India-Pakistan was his deal. Bullshit, it was not. He was bragging that Thailand-Cambodia was his deal. Bullshit, it was not. And of course, when he finds an iron wall of sovereignty, which is the case of Russia, China, and even Lula now is picking up the mantle of defending Brazil's sovereignty, he throws a tantrum like a 5-year-old. So what kind of system of international relations is this? Where there's no diplomacy, where you have the leader of the so-called former greatest power in the history of the universe behaving like a moron all the time, non-stop, day after day. There cannot be a solid system of international relations. And diplomacy is already dead, as we all know. And from the point of view of the European vassals, it's more or less the same thing, because the only thing that these people in charge of the European Union and NATO, whenever they open their mouths, is to talk about how they're preparing for the war against Russia in the next 5 years, with a date set already for 2030. You see, Nima, we are in a vicious circle, and there's no escape.
I think what Lula is doing is amazing, Pepe. I didn't expect that coming from Lula, and he's fighting back.
Yes, he is fighting back.
Yeah, here is what he said. We have it with subtitles.
Yes.
Obviamente que eu não vou deixar de compreender a importância da relação diplomática com os Estados Unidos, que já dura 201 anos. Eu não vou esquecer que eles também já deram o golpe aqui, ajudaram a dar o golpe. Mas o que eu quero saber é daqui para frente o que é que eu faço. E daqui para frente eles têm que saber que nós temos o que negociar. Nós temos tamanho, nós temos postura, nós temos interesses econômicos e interesses políticos para negociar. Eu não vou abrir mão de achar que a gente precisa procurar construir uma moeda alternativa para que a gente possa negociar com os outros países. Eu não preciso ficar subordinado ao dólar.
I'm so happy that he's talking about that they have tried to stage a coup here in Brazil.
Well,
this is the first time an
yes.
official here in Brazil is talking about it.
This was immensely important, not only for Brazilians of all stripes, but for the international audience, because a lot of young people are going to start doing their searches. Well, what was the story of the coup? When it for them, 2016 is a long time ago. You see, many of them were very, very young at the time, or kids. But this will, we're going to have the new generations delving into the car wash operation, the coup against Dilma, what happened afterwards, why did they put Lula in jail? This is very, very important. But you see, Nima, how he started this particular. It's probably the key part of his speech yesterday. He started talking about diplomacy. The first thing he said was, we prize diplomacy and we want diplomacy. At the same time, we cannot forget who we are talking to. And then he backtracks to the coup. Very, very important, which, by the way, was organized by the Democrats, not the Republicans. And then he goes to the mega, mega, mega red flag, which, if I was his speechwriter, I would have phrased it differently. Because what the BRICS are doing, and this is something that Ryabkov, the number 2 of the Russian Foreign Ministry, among others, has been saying practically every week, is our Peskov, when he talks about it on behalf of Putin, all the major Russian officials and the Chinese as well, when they talk about it, they always emphasize BRICS priority is to have trade in our national currencies. This is the number 1 priority for all of us. If you mention de-dollarization like Lula did in his speech, that's, well, it's redder than red when it comes to how Trump is going to absorb this. So this will be a reason enough. Only the speech is reason enough for Trump to go completely batshit crazy from now on. Because he can even play this tape and say, you see, you have the president of Brazil saying he's going to de-dollarize. I cannot allow that. And I'm going after them. And that's the case. So this is there are, I would say there are 3 vectors that are as important. One is as important as the other 2 in this speech. In this very small, less than a minute, now. The power of diplomacy and the power of sovereignty, emphasized by Lula. Don't forget the recent past, which they destabilized it before, and they will try to destabilize us again. And the final part, which is exactly where we are now, because it gives Trump his casus belli against Brazil. In his mind, in Trump's mind, the casus belli against Brazil and destroying the importance of Brazil, the sovereignty of Brazil, the Brazilian economy, you name it, is that Brazil's president wants to de-dollarize. So Lula has to coordinate these 3 vectors. And from now on, he has to be even more careful than before. Because there will be blood. There will be blood on the tracks ahead. And you can say that better than anybody, Nima. So, okay, I'll ask you the direct question. In Brazil, the way you see it, because you are in Brazil and you are following this full time, do you think the Brazilian government is ready for what Trump 2.0 can unleash against Brazil from now on?
I think they're totally ready for that. They're getting ready. They couldn't believe it before it happening, you know. But right now they're getting prepared. They're somehow, because there is no option for them, Pepe. You have to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have your options on the table to see what are the possibilities for Brazil. Brazil, there is no possibility. If there is no diplomacy between Brazil and the United States, the other option would be going to East, going to the global South, going to make better relationship with Russia, China, India, I would argue. Because India is fighting back as well. It's not just about Brazil.
Not as strong as Brazil.
What's so strange to me, Pepe, you look at Donald Trump and his attitude. If you want to put pressure, let's assume the final goal is putting pressure on Russia and China, you would somehow you try to get closer to Brazil, to India, trying to make some sort of new ties, friendship, doing this, doing that, and making some sort of mutual understanding between the 2 economies. Then you try to talk about Russia, China, and the diplomacy they have to. But you attack Brazil, you attack India, you attack each and everybody on this planet, and you believe you are Brazil, Pepe. Let's assume that I'm gonna kill your economy, and I'm gonna kill the economy of Russia. By the way, you have to help me to kill the economy of Russia. How is that? What's that? If you're gonna kill me, if you're gonna kill Russia, I'm not gonna cooperate with you. I'm not gonna help you. You are the enemy. Russia is not my enemy.
Right.
This is what's going on in the mind of many people, in my opinion. I'm not talking about Europeans, because European policy doesn't make sense to anybody. I'm talking about the rational players in the game. I'm talking about India, Brazil, Iran, Russia, China. So we don't have any other option, Pepe. You have to understand the reality of what's going on. I think the Lula government is getting to the point that totally understands the complexity of the issue, the way that they're trying to, after all, they're trying to make their decisions based on diplomacy and a better relationship with anybody, because Brazil is not looking for any sort of conflict, war. Brazil is somehow, it's out of this sort of chaos. But Donald Trump is trying to bring Brazil into the chaos. This is the problem for the Brazilians, for those people who are supporting the sovereignty of Brazil.
Absolutely. And in the bigger picture, I think this is being very helpful to prove to Brazilians that Brazil is part of a war by the empire of chaos against BRICS as a whole. And Brazil is probably now, for Trump 2.0, the key target, because they think it's the weakest link of all of these BRICS founders, in fact. When you look at Brazil, India, China, and Russia, they're all BRICS founders. So Trump is at war with the four of them now, non-stop. And this reveals most of all the degree of desperation. For many reasons. Personal reasons, Trump, he's not a strategist. He doesn't read anything. He's extremely misinformed about anything. He doesn't check his figures. And he relies on blah, blah, blah coming from 2 or 3 of his closest aides. So obviously you can fool this guy forever, easily, and get away with it. And he will never admit mistakes, because he never admits mistakes, because it doesn't fit his macho man persona. And obviously he looks at the tariff war, the tariff temper tantrum, as I put it, the TTT, where he tariffed a great deal of the planet, right? We don't know what this is going to happen in the short run and the ramifications, but the blowbacks are there, inbuilt in many of them, especially the fact that any of these nation states that they will diversify their trade partners, and they are already doing it. In the case of Brazil, for instance, the case of the fantastic case of China opening from now on their coffee market to 180 Brazilian producers at the same time. Come here and sell our coffee, we'll buy it. Fantastic. There'll be many other options in the case of Brazil, because what Brazil sells, everybody wants to buy in international markets. And the US for Brazil is a small market. It's 12% in terms of exports, not much, So they can easily make it up with their new partners in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in China, India, Russia, you name it. So this process of BRICS getting even closer together is being facilitated by the empire itself. I cannot believe that there is anybody in the Trump 0.2 universe with an IQ above 70 that doesn't figure that out. And everybody that does is foreign economists or Paul Krugman, who usually is wrong about everything, but he's particularly right on this matter. Stiglitz, everybody has figured it out. And this also shows to all of us the extreme mediocrity of Team Trump 2.0. If we thought that the previous Autopen administration was mediocre, look at these people now. They are buying a global war against the global majority and against the #1 multilateral organization, which is organizing the top players of the global majority. In terms of a strategic, between commas, decision, this does not even qualify as stupid. This is off the charts completely. And of course, what? These are empty threats. Like, I'm going to have my 2 nuclear submarines patrolling. Do you think the Russians are shaking in their boots, Nima? The same day, Putin says, now Oreshnik is being in serial production from now on. So this was a message not only for the US, but especially for the Europeans. Okay, you want to try something stupid? We have Zircon, Sarmat, Iskander, you name it, the Belgorod submarines, etc. And now we have a lot of Oreshniks from now on. So you still want to try something stupid? Bring it on. And it all goes back to the same point, which is the death of diplomacy. We had the death of diplomacy orchestrated by the previous American administration, and this one, they buried diplomacy completely. There's not and this is something that the Russians, they tried until the last minute. Okay, let's talk with them. Those meetings with Witkov visiting Moscow, several rounds, but they didn't even start to discuss the core issues of the US-Russia relationship. And even before that happened, Trump had what else? 5-year-old temper tantrum again. And what Medvedev said, and Medvedev was not angry or aggressive. He just reminded the US, look, if you want to start talking about nuclear, we have our own nuclear doctrine and our own mechanisms in place, and you're not going to like it if it comes to that, And his reference to the dead hand, that was very, very precise. If there is an attack, a nuclear attack, out of the blue by the US, by United States of America, literally. And this is what Medvedev was trying to explain to Trump. Obviously doesn't know how it works, Nima. He has no clue. And there's nobody to go there to the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, 5 minutes of your attention, please. Let me explain to you how does the mechanism of a nuclear attack works? How does a first strike, if we launch a first strike, how the Russians are going to respond? There's nobody to do this. And that makes it even more dangerous.
We know that when Donald Trump has decided he was talking about nuclear submarines in Ukraine, they were so happy. Yermak was the reaction coming from Ukraine was so positive.
Yes.
So we had the same in Europe. Do they, in your opinion, you are in Europe, you travel a lot across Europe. Do you feel that they really understand the gravity of what's going on? If anything, Larry, I talked with Larry Johnson moments ago. He mentioned that in 1984, 1988, the United States withdrew all these nuclear bombs from Europe, and Donald Trump has decided to put them back again. They're going to be used by F-35, and they can hit Russia. What is the necessity of doing this if you're not planning for something?
Exactly. I would say the less scary option is macho man posture. But we cannot trust that that's only the case. There's nothing else beyond that. From the point of view of the industrial military complex, no, that's not the full story. they think that this is a way of pressuring Russia or intimidating Russia, as if Russia would be intimidated by anything the Americans throw against them. Once again, why? Because these people, they still live in what our Chinese friends call Cold War mentality. Absolutely correct. And when we have this retired generals or older generals, be they American or Brits, when they go on record talking about we are intimidating Russia, we have to put pressure over Russia, it's beyond a joke. So, but it's dangerous. Once again, it's dangerous because they believe in their own propaganda. The Russians and the Chinese, they don't believe in their own propaganda. They believe in facts. They believe in what they have factually in terms of deterrence forces, in terms of their nuclear arsenal, in terms of their hypersonic arsenal. They believe in reality indexes. The Americans, they believe in propaganda. It's a completely different mindset. And of course, this aura of exceptionalism, invulnerability, the greatest army in the history of humanity, all that crap that they regurgitate to themselves all the time. And it's the raison d'être, to be to use French. It's the lifeline of the industrial military complex. And once again, that's the reason we come back to the beginning of our conversation, why there cannot be some sort of peaceful arrangement in terms of spheres of influence and indivisibility of security between the US and Russia. They will never, the industrial military complex, the whole system will never accept it. And Trump now is a hostage of these people, of these silos in different parts of the complex. Let's say CEOs of Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, etc., think tanks, retired generals, active operatives in the CIA. Trump is a hostage of these people, and they control the narrative in the media as well. And they control most of what goes out on Fox News, which is the only thing that Trump actually watches. So it's very, very dangerous because it's a vicious circle once again. And compared to the power of this system, a mere president of the United States is just a speck of sand. It doesn't count for much. And now he's even being derided by Republicans. Not only MAGA, extra MAGA, sub MAGA, crypto MAGA, Democrats. No, but even Republicans are saying, oh my God, this guy has lost his marbles. Very dangerous. The whole situation is extremely dangerous because any way we look at it, we cannot see a rational exit or an off-ramp which would lead via diplomacy to at least, the players sitting on the same table and start talking in rational terms. For instance, if there ever was, it won't happen, a Yalta 2.0 in Beijing on September 3rd. Putin will be there. Xi Jinping will be the host. Trump could go. Trump could be invited by the Chinese, for instance. And then we'll have all of them the possibility of the three of them sitting on the same table. It's not going to happen. Another possibility will be at APEC Summit, which is going to be, I think, end of October, if I'm not mistaken. Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. The three of them could be in the same room again. Trump, the problem is he's not ready, Nima, for a Yalta 2.0. Because a Yalta 2.0 would be redefining the system of international relations. Trump doesn't want to redefine anything. He wants to win his way. This means the other two will have to necessarily lose. China and Russia will never accept that. They are the leaders of this process of establishing a new system of international relations, geopolitical and geoeconomic. You cannot explain that to Trump. First of all, because he'll never understand. Second, he'll never accept it. So you have to, assuming you have a face-to-face, Russia and China will have to try to explain to Trump, look, let's discuss the situation now, geopolitically, geoeconomically, all over the world. It's very unstable. Let's try to normalize this, and you have to do your part as well. We count on you to also help us to normalize all these hotspots everywhere, etc. Do you think you understand that, Nima? Obviously not. So it's a dead end.
I think many of our audience believe that the Biden administration was the worst administration, but Donald Trump is getting to a level that I would say that the Biden administration couldn't achieve it. It's the worst of the worst, the Trump administration. You look at Russia asking Lavrov, what do you want in Ukraine? They know what do they want. What are they seeking for? Putin knows. Lavrov knows.
Yes.
Look at Washington. What we are hearing a lot. All the mainstream media are reporting on them each and every day, each and every minute. But do you understand what do they want in Ukraine? Nothing. Nothing substantial. You don't have any. Even Donald Trump doesn't know. Donald Trump himself doesn't know what he wants in Ukraine.
Exactly.
Marco Rubio, he's asking every time he was asked in the mainstream media, they're asking him a question about Ukraine. He's giving a different answer to the question. So there has to be some sort of policy that the other countries should understand, that they may understand it and make policies based on them. This is the problem, Pepe. Look at the way that Iran was behaving, talking with the United States. Has Iran changed its position? Iran didn't change its position. It's the United States. Witkoff, every time he negotiated with the Iranians, coming out and talking with the press, he comes out with something else, adding something else, or maybe changing his latest comment. This is the problem. Nobody is responsible in Washington.
This is what happens when you blow up diplomacy and every rational diplomatic track, which is what they did. They were apparently involved in diplomacy with Russia, and they blew it up. They were apparently involved in diplomacy with Iran. Even worse, they blew up the diplomacy, and they were trying to blow up Iran in the process. So how can any serious player in the BRICS sphere and among the global majority believe that they can have a diplomatic, serious, rational dialogue with the Americans? They can't. When you look at Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, really, I would have a problem buying a hot dog from Marco Rubio in the streets of Miami. Seriously. I will look at that guy and say, does he know what he's doing? This guy is the Secretary of State. Wow. Not to mention that head of the Pentagon. That guy is a cartoon of himself, in fact. He has absolutely no clue about anything. Only doing push-ups in the morning. That's it. So, and that's a typical characteristic of Trump. He's absolutely lousy in selecting the people serving under him. Sometimes there's one or two picks that are not as mediocre, but most of them are, their mediocrity is, 5 stars, 7 stars, Yeah, not easy. But and we all depend now on, let's say, this league of rational gentlemen, to put it in a diplomatic way. Xi, Putin, Lula, hopefully Modi, Pezeshkian, even though we have serious reservations vis-a-vis
But
Mr.
he was somehow weakened in the aftermath of the attacks on Iran,
And
because right now,
Iran, yes. Go ahead.
right now we have a new council in Iran about talking about and deciding about the policies toward Israel or any sort of attack on Iran, and they call it Supreme Defense Council. It's a new one. It's
a new one.
Yeah. Right. They're gonna decide, but the role of Pezeshkian in that council is not that much powerful.
It's not very powerful. Yes, that's. I would say this is a welcome development from an Iranian point of view. Yes, definitely. But we depend on this League of Gentlemen to. Otherwise, this thing will go off the rails in the next few months, very, very quickly. Especially, Nima, considering that the Russians are seeing a window of opportunity to go for the kill in Ukraine in the next few months, and they will take it. They will take it, even though the level of terror attacks against Russia in the next few months can increase to unbearable proportions, and then we don't know how the bear is going to lash out. I'm very worried about Crimea and the Black Sea. Very, very worried. They are ready to come up with something really big in the Black Sea. And of course, this plan that was SVR, Russian Foreign Intel, they already know what the Brits are planning to do in terms of staging a false flag. The target is the shadow fleet that sells Russian oil all over the place. And obviously, false flag to blame Russia and then criminalize the Russian shadow fleet for good. And once again, this is what MI6 does better than anybody else, organizing terror attacks. It's what they've been doing in Ukraine for years. So Russia has some serious problems ahead in the different fronts. Not to mention Armenia, Azerbaijan. Well, wow, this is a can of worms, which they haven't even opened the can of worms, Armenia, Azerbaijan yet. So it's going to be very, very tough for Russia. So obviously they are, at the same time that they are focused on the breakdown with Trump 2.0, they have to be focused on all these new vectors and focuses and hot spots popping up all around Russia. It's going to be ultra tough.
Do you see how Witkoff simply disappeared from the scene?
Disappeared completely, yes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And after the attacks on both Russia and Iran, he came into the scene, and right now they're talking about he's going to talk with Russians.
He showed up in Israel, right? Saying there's no starvation in Gaza.
Yeah.
Wow, he should have kept his mouth shut, but he couldn't.
Pepe, do you feel that Europe would change policy toward Gaza, toward Israel?
Forget it. No way. We should never forget. Very, very important. Everything that is happening in Gaza is fully approved by the leadership of the European Union, and I would say by most leaders of the individual nation states around here. People should never forget that. And of course, people all across the global south, the global majority, they see that. They understand that very, very well. With a few exceptions, there are condemnations, sometimes from Spain, sometimes from Ireland, from Hungary, of course, but, very, very circumscribed considering the size of the EU. From here, for instance, forget it. And this Macron idea of recognizing the state of Palestine is for completely different motives. It has nothing to do with alleviating the plight of people in Gaza and the tragedy in Gaza. It's he has his own political ideas whispered by his handlers, And we still need to get deeper into it. What he really wants with recognizing Palestine. He said that this would happen next month. So the game is different. It's a different game, and we need some time to really get into it. You know. But the collective West supports the genocide and the starvation of Gaza, and even the annexation of the West Bank. That's the headline for all of us. You know, we should never forget that.
Who's the biggest supporter of Israel in Europe, Pepe?
Germany and France, because they are the two most powerful nations. Here, the Zionist lobby in because everything here means Paris. The regions don't exist in terms of setting policy. So the Zionist lobby in Paris is something out of this world. It's proportionally is even more powerful than AIPAC in DC. And in Germany, of course, because we will have to bring back everybody. Kant, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Hegel. Okay, guys, sit on the table and restart. Can you please restart and start deconstructing and reconstructing the Germany guilty complex after World War II, and why they have to be even more Israeli than Israel in all matters.
How about the United Kingdom, Pepe?
Yes, but don't forget the UK over there. They are not Europe anymore, no? So technically, we're talking about an island in the middle of the North Sea. You know, there's nothing to do with Europe. And as they themselves always regarded themselves, no? It is England, UK, and everybody here is the continentals. The continentals means Europe as a whole. Of course, tell me about it. They have a grip in London. They have a grip on the city of London, which is even more important. They have a grip on mainstream, the whole mainstream media, which basically concentrated in London. Of course, no question. So when you got these three, London, Berlin, and Paris, that also explains something that so far is more like an idea than a de facto operation. But this Anglo-French German treaty against Russia that they more or less signed last month. Okay, let's see where this is going. This is part of one of the baby steps towards the self-advertised by NATO war against Russia all the way to 2030. No question. So this would mean that this Anglo-French German axis would be on the forefront of the war against Russia. But with what? To quote Stalin, talk about the how many divisions do they get? How many real weapons do they have? How do they plan to intimidate Russia? Well, everything is a joke coming from these three, right? So if it's not these three, it gets even more comical, Nima, because then the vanguard is going to be Poland, Finland, and the three chihuahuas of the Baltics. Same thing. What do these clowns actually have against Russia? Doesn't even qualify as a joke. And when you think about it, this is at the heart of NATO deliberations and its own NATO internal papers. They take it seriously. We need to prepare for war against Russia by 2030.
Before wrapping up, Pepe, I want to add something about Brazil.
Yes.
Because in my opinion, there is some sort of miscalculation or misunderstanding on the part of the United States about Brazil, because they feel that they can get something like Argentina under Javier
Yeah.
Milei. They think that Brazil could be similar to the case of Argentina. It's not possible, even if they get Bolsonaro in power. They don't understand that here, Bolsonaro, even as president, if he wants to move toward Argentina under Milei, he's not able to do that. It's a totally different game. It's not about even Lula. You remember they were trying to put pressure on Lula for something that had nothing to do with Lula, with the Supreme Court here in Brazil, and doing something for. It's not possible. The president of Brazil is not the god. Is not someone who's able to do each and everything and any sort of change that the United States is asking for. I think this is the problem in the mindset of Americans, that they feel that Brazil can be somehow similar to Argentina.
Well, try to get somebody on Trump 2.0 who understands the complexity of Brazil, Nima. Good luck.
No.
Good luck with that.
No sign. No sign.
No, absolutely out of the question. So they project which is usually what they do with every culture. In fact, it's not only with Latin American nations, in West Asia, in Asia as a whole, with China, with Russia, in Southeast Asia, you name it, with India. They project their desires and their prejudices onto these cultures, and then they say, we're going to transform these people. In a sense, without stretching it too much, it's what they did with Native Americans. They projected all their prejudices, all the twisted assumptions that they had in their mind onto the Native Americans to subdue them and in the end exterminate them. Psychological, deep in their psychology of a total far west, which is what the US is essentially, with silos of brilliance in the arts, in cinema, in literature, in poetry, in photography, of course, undeniable. Usually by misfits and outsiders. For instance, the greatest American filmmakers, they were all misfits and outsiders. From John Ford to Scorsese, everybody, Coppola, all of them, they were misfits, And the greatest writers, they were all misfits. Scott Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Faulkner, they were all misfits and outsiders as well. But I was... this past few days was great, but when I go back to the West, I go back to, I grew up. I'm a children of the TV generation, and my generation, we grew up on, was the first generation that grew up glued to TV. So obviously, I go back to series. So I was watching the end of Yellowstone, which I haven't seen yet. I watched Landman back to back, and then I start watching the prequels to Yellowstone. And the great merit of this Yellowstone universe is they depict with perfection the whole dementia of the Far West, the dialectic of the cold, to come back to something that was very, very, in the 60s and 70s, this was a mantra to define the US. Horribly savage, pitiless, Darwinian to the highest level, and a non-stop war of extermination of the weak. This is what built the US essentially, and this is very well depicted in this whole Yellowstone universe. When the series that is called 1883, when they depict when the patriarch of the Dutton clan, he left the South after the War of Secession, which he was a Southern. He lost, and he decided to immigrate to the West. And this part of the series focuses on his family and other immigrants coming from most of them Germans, in fact, and their absolutely terrifying journey to reach. Well, I haven't finished yet, so it will be Montana and Oregon, the deep north and the deep west. And in terms of the documentary, Nima and our audience, is documenting the folly of the whole thing, and of course their treatment of Native Americans and the inbuilt folly of this conquest of the West is excellent. It's as good as a Sergio Leone Western, for that matter, or even a John Ford Western, you know. And this is inbuilt in the American mentality. It's something that you read in Daniel Defoe, and when you read foreign authors who went to America and settled in America and understood the American spirit, like D.H. Lawrence, for instance, it's all there. You know, this inner folly, this absolute dementia of exterminating the native population and building the so-called American dream on the ashes of civilizations that were exterminated along the way. This hasn't changed much. They still have this settler mentality when dealing with the rest of the world. It's our way or the highway. And if you don't do what I say, I'll go there and kill you, tariff you, you name it. It's still the same thing. Still the same thing. So there's a case to be made that Donald Trump is just another glorified settler of the 19th century. Could be. It's an essay to be written.
He's going to be even worse. I don't see anything good coming out of this administration. So far, nothing good came out.
You bet.
Let's see what would happen. Thank you so much, Pepe.
My
Great
pleasure.
pleasure, always.
Always a pleasure.
Grande prazer.
Grande prazer. E o mar aqui do lado, a 10 metros, te saúda. Deixa eu ver se dá para mostrar daqui.
Kofi, follow me.